Hello, and thank you for attending one of my Slay the Spire 2 presentations. Today I'd like to talk about review bombs and outlining the reasons why toxicity will never win again. So Slay the Spire 2 has gone through a couple of review bombs, most notably the March 19 review bomb, the 16th of April review bomb, and the 7th of May review bomb. And since then, they've continued to aggregate some off-topic reviews. There's been a pretty consistent negative review period, as well as an aggregation of negative reviews every single patch. There's a lot of reasons for this, and frankly, it's not an indictment of the game. I'll be explaining why it's not an indictment of the game, and explaining where each of these review bombs come from. A review bomb, maybe just for somebody who doesn't know, is when a subset of the community essentially organizes to leave as many negative reviews as possible in one short time period. And they'll very often specifically highlight a reason for a negative review. The idea to them is that a complaint that affects the image of the brand or the image of the product that outlines a specific reason is actionable to an organization or actionable to a company to fix something or change something for that specific reason. And so the idea behind the review bomb is essentially that if we leave enough negative reviews, they will do the thing that we want them to do to make the product the way we want to make it. And I suppose before we get too much into any of those reasons or any of those demands, what is the purpose of a review? A review bomb is something that's different to a review. It's a misuse of the review tool, or an abuse or a niche use of the review tool. What are reviews? Reviews are a way for community members to critique the shared space. They're a continuous process of evaluation and community trajectory, so reviews should be ongoing pretty much all the time by anyone who wants to participate in shared community spaces and shared community projects. Reviews are a way to validate positive participation and model behavior. So, for example, if a restaurant has an excellent product and is cheap for the customer and no one gets food poisoning, leaving a positive review is a way to say that this restaurant meets our expectations as consumers and as community members. And reviews also moderate participant behavior as well as update those expectations. So say, for example, a restaurant gets a negative review for having unsafe food and for somebody getting food poisoning. That's reinforcing the expectation that if people eat at a restaurant, they're not going to get food poisoning. Reviews, of course, don't just apply to restaurants, though. Reviews apply to all kinds of communities. And by community, I don't just mean, like a cardboard cutout corporate art picture of 6 different people. I mean services, restaurants, consumer products, lovers, drinking buddies, aesthetic domain, scientific research. Try publishing a scientific research paper for peer review and not meeting community expectations about what good methodology looks like and what replicability looks like and what valuable hypothesis testing look like. They will let you know this is not up to par. That is the review process. Drinking buddies, try going out with your mates and one of your drinking buddies goes way too hard and ends up dragging the night out, dragging the group to different places they don't want to go, turning what should be, a chill birthday session into like a riot, or conversely, turning what everyone hopes to be a big night out into a sob fest, or like ruining the mood. That person's potentially not going to get an invitation in the future, and that review of their behavior is what's going to lead to other people not necessarily inviting them. And dating is almost entirely a review process, right? You've got all your dating apps, all of which are essentially review aggregators. And then you've got all your discourse around dating, and the discourse around dating is all about setting those expectations for how somebody should, meet those standards. So again, standards and reviews and the continuous feedback cycle of reviews and standards, that's what that's for. So with that in mind, let's look at the first review bomb, which was the Doormaker update on the beta. When the Doormaker was first updated on the beta branch of Slay the Spire 2, they were changed to have an extra ability. The Doormaker devours every 10th card you draw. And so what would happen was you draw 10 cards, and when you draw that 10th card, it's immediately exhausted. People hated this. The game was heavily review bombed, and the criticism were around things like, this is a deck builder, you shouldn't be taking my deck away, this is an RNG mechanic, I don't like RNG, I like consistency in my deck building game, this is elitist, the only people who like this change the Ivory Tower streamers with 75% plus win rates, I can't grind the game all the time, so on and so forth. Essentially, this was a nerf. This was a nerf to decks that were like, 10 or 12 cards that would just go infinite on turn one every single fight of the game. Essentially, the run had been won when, the player rolled tanks and cleaver and went to a campfire and clicked cook, and they removed, 2 cards from their deck down to like a 12-card deck or whatever. Or the run was won when they had Pale's Eye, and they had like a 14 card or an 18 card deck, and they organized it so that on turn one they can always Pale's Eye, and then on turn two, after exhausting half their deck, and most of the time their deck could immediately go infinite, kind of regardless of what was in the first hand. The run doesn't need to happen, right? Like if the run is procedurally winnable on seeing Pale on the ancient bonus of Act 2, the rest of the game doesn't need to happen, which is why the Act 3 boss is being updated. It's a very, very clear design choice to say, hey, you can't just go infinite every single part of the fight. When you are going infinite, we also need you to be able to solve something like the Doormaker, where every 10th card you draw could essentially be taken away. So in essence, a lot of people were complaining here that they could no longer win the run early, and they're complaining that the run was being extended. And a lot of players wanted to, quote unquote, solve the game by building a deck in this deck builder that could win every fight in the game, which we'll discuss further is not the point of the game. It's not what the game is about. Characterizing Slay the Spire as a deck builder is very much like characterizing like a pond as a puddle. Slay the Spire is a dungeon crawler that you mediate through a deck. It is not a deck builder first and foremost, it is a dungeon crawler first and foremost, and the devs have delivered and presented this design ethos for a decade now. Like, the game is not a deck builder first and foremost, as described by the devs and the authors. And this design philosophy of presenting an enemy that challenges the player in a way that is not necessarily solvable in the same way as every other enemy in the game is exactly what you might expect out of a dungeon crawler. If you're playing Kingsfield and every single enemy is killable by strafing to the left and power attacking, it's not a very good game. If you're playing the Halo campaign, which is, essentially a linear dungeon crawler, it would be a bit silly if every single fight in the game was solved by a sniper rifle and you started every level with a sniper rifle. That the game gives you a sniper rifle when it's going to be useful for you and when the level is designed in that way. Other times it gives you different weapons or different vehicles, and it even gives you some non-linear levels with, jumps and ramps and vehicles to navigate large levels. It's easy to imagine that if every level of the Halo campaign gave you a sniper rifle and nothing else, that people wouldn't enjoy the game very much, right? But this review bomb of the Doormaker update on the beta, it came from players on the beta, because that's the only place the update was made. It came from players who were enjoying going infinite and enjoying winning every run in a very, very, streamlined, repetitive way. And it came through the review filter because these players didn't want to use the F2 feedback filter and felt that leaving a review to try and hurt to try and hurt the developer was the way to get the change that they wanted to see. Because, again, the idea behind a review bomb is that these people want their complaints specifically to be heard, whilst at the same time affecting the aggregate metascore to affect the public presentation of the game. The second review bomb, again, was with the Doormaker. The Doormaker was changed to have 3 modes. One about devouring cards, so there was a turn where any card you play gets exhausted. There's a turn about preventing extra card draw, so you couldn't draw cards beyond your opening hand. And there was a turn where you got taxed extra energy, so every time you play the card, it would take an energy away from you, and then it would go through that cycle. And all of these effects are presented through all other stages of the game. The energy tax turn is kind of similar to the ceremonial bell, or it's kind of similar to the queen saying, hey, if you play this card, you can't play that other card. The Doormaker wasn't really too impactful in that regard because you could still play zero costs because, even if you had zero energy, you can always play more zero costs. And so cards like Overclock or Battle Trance, which let you draw cards and then let you play things like Claw or Prepared or Bloodletting, were still very, very achievable on those turns that prevented extra card draw. Well, most of the game prevents extra card draw by limiting your energy. No amount of Burning Pacts or Acrobatics or Skims are going to let you play more cards. They're just going to let you choose one of those cards to play because the energy, because the limiting factor there is energy. And so what this turn is saying is, hey, you need your deck to have a high enough density of good cards or of high impact cards that you can draw a hand to find those high impact cards without overdrawing. It's very similar actually to the energy tax turn, where rather than playing 4 or 5 cards, all of which are low impact, and scaling with dexterity or scaling with footwork or scaling with feel no pain, instead it's saying we want you to have some high impact cards and play those. And you could set that up with the Devour cards turn, because on the turn where the Doormaker would exhaust all your cards, if you play those low impact cards, if you play those cards that are not very good, because they just draw more cards, and are not very good because even if they're efficient for 1 energy, they're inefficient for 2 energy, you can just have those devoured on the Devour turn. And so this version of the Doormaker does both of those. It gives you both the tools and the challenges. It gives you the challenge of having high impact effects and cards and high impact opening hands on those turns. And it also lets you devour all those cards that aren't going to contribute to those hands. So it actually gives you the best of both worlds. Of course, people hated this. Players that don't want to transform their deck as they go, players who think that they can go into the Spire with essentially a constructed deck and again do the same thing every single fight. They don't like effects like this because they think that they're losing their cards and then they can't draw more cards to find the combo that they want, and then they're seeing that they're being taxed on energy, and then their strategy of going infinite with a pair of 1-cost cards and an energy relic goes out the window, right? People also hated this because the fight gives you both the challenges and the solution, but you still need to have drafted a deck that could, exist. There should still be some version of the deck or something underneath the bloat in the deck there that can win the Doormaker fight. And so people who aren't considering if they could exhaust down to a core hand of 7 cards to win this fight, or a core deck of 15 cards that are high impact to win this fight, they're not interested in a fight like this with 3 different mechanics. Does the fight have 3 different mechanics? Yeah, sure. Does it actually have 3 different mechanics? Not really. It's kind of just asking you to play 2-cost and 3-cost high impact cards, and then it's giving you a bin to chuck everything else in. So it's not actually that complicated. But of course, the reviews about this were, people not understanding what phase it's in, people with screens that are too small not reading, people who don't plan out their turns, finding that their energy tax got taken away, people who don't read the mechanics, going on tilt because they played card draw and didn't get to draw any cards, playing calculated gamble and throwing away their entire hand, or playing a flash of steel and being, why did my energy disappear? People not reading their cards and people not reading what's going on in play is a very, very common issue across basically every single strategy game. I think Slay the Spire 2 suffers from being popular enough and having enough hype that it has attracted a very, very, very large player base. And these player bases probably don't have the experience going through a complicated game and finding themselves making mistakes. They don't have the experience to know not to tilt in that circumstance. I've played strategy games for literally my entire life, and maybe back in the day it would have been frustrating when I tried to play my Dark Ritual and my opponent tapped their Sphere of Resistance and asked me to pay more mana for it. That's the game. Your opponent's doing things to prevent your build, especially preventing your combo is what happens. And just because it's a single player game, it doesn't mean that the opponents that you have in the game should roll over and let you do whatever you want just because you're the player. Like these mechanics exist so that they can interact with you regardless of what nonsense you're doing. But of course, this version of the Doormaker was also taken out and replaced. The patch notes said Doormaker has been replaced with a brand new boss, Aeon Glass. While Doormaker had interesting micro decisions in the fight, he was over the complexity threshold of what we want and had lingering issues. We decided that starting over fresh will let us hit what we actually want for an Act 3 boss. And replacing Doormaker with the Aeon Glass shows you exactly what they were looking for in this fight, right? They want you to play high-impact cards, they want you to not spam out cards, and they want you to not go infinite. The Aeon Glass punishes exactly the same thing, but with different mechanics. And frankly, the status, the Aeon Glass's status mechanic is probably more complicated than what the Doormaker was asking of you. The Doormaker as well had a bit of a flavor issue in the sense that it wasn't making doors. A reskin or a retheme might have been necessary at some point. But yeah, the negative reviews and the review bombers of the Doormaker, I suppose, got their win in that the Doormaker was removed. I don't know if it was for the better, because the Aeon Glass is not necessarily more simple and is actually significantly more punishing for like infinite decks. Because the Doormaker still gave you those opportunities to do it, to curate your deck for the win condition. The Doormaker just asked you that you had that curation somewhere in your deck. The Aeon Glass doesn't give you that opportunity. The Aeon Glass says if you rock in here with an infinite focused deck, you're going to get a bunch of statuses, and your low impact cards are going to be overwhelmed, and there's nothing you can do about it unless you bring in solutions. The Doormaker gave you the solution, so it's probably, I think, a harder boss. The third review bomb of the game came with the accumulation of beta patches being pushed to the main. So this is Major Update 1. It was about a month into the game. There had been 4 beta patches, and they were migrated to the live. So players who had not yet opted into the beta got all those changes at once. This was a notable difficulty increase for a lot of the main players. They continued to play on High Ascension without re-climbing to learn the new cards and learn the new mechanics or learn the new boss fights. And these players kind of got hit with everything all at once, right? Because they had 4 weeks, they'd had like a month of easy infinites, drafting acrobatics at common all the time, and drafting glow with extra card draw, spamming out souls on the Necrobinder, and forcing Hellraiser decks. So these players saw all of these tools very much nerfed all at the same time, and left a bunch of negative reviews. Same idea as the Doormaker, same idea as the second iteration of the Doormaker. These were all the same complaints coming all at the same time, just with players who hadn't gone onto the beta branch yet. And it was definitely a noticeable difficulty increase for those High Ascension players. Perhaps if they climbed again, they would have had an easier time of it. And again, this was explicitly the point. It was explained in the Major Update patch notes what was going on. It was explained in all the beta notes what was going on. It was explained why this is happening and what kind of purpose the devs have for this. And there's also been a lot of discourse from a lot of the content creators and a lot of the big streamers or big YouTubers, I think including myself. The Act 3 needs to exist, and it needs to, be a challenge for the game. It is a strategy game. It is not the intended playstyle of the game that you find a combination of cards on floor 3 or floor 4, and then you curate your deck to be that and nothing but that. And then you ride that all the way to the end of Act 3, and the last 25 or 30 minutes of the run don't even matter. It's just going through the procedure. If you want to play things like that, you can play Dominion, you can play Ascension, you can play Diablo 3 or Diablo 4. These games acknowledge that the player is going to be comboing in very, very infinite, very, very easily. And when that happens, the game comes to an end. Dominion ends as soon as you can buy out the points pile, and you can buy out the points pile as soon as you've got comboing off. Diablo 3 and Diablo 4, they increase the difficulty level as soon as your character gets good enough. You exist in 2 states in these games. You exist in the state of building to the combo. You get to execute the combo for a little bit, and then it takes you to the next game. It starts again. Slay the Spire is not that game, right? If going infinite easily was the point of Slay the Spire 2, why would there be an Act 2 or an Act 3 at all? It would be relatively easy to recognize that an infinite combo is happening in Slay the Spire. There's only so many ways to do it, and even the most esoteric kind of 6-card combo versions of infinites still have all of the same markers. You could just count if the player reshuffled their deck a suitable number of times, or count how much energy the player spent over the course of a turn. And then the game could determine, yep, you've overpowered the game enough, you're going to the next ascension level, or the run is being restarted, you won the game. Why would we have Act 2 and Act 3 if the point was to go infinite? Obviously it's not. Right? The developers say that, the long-time players of the game say that, the game has the content there to say that, and the position of Act 3 in the early days of the early access being essentially the player just doing a lap is unfun. Imagine you played Mario Kart, and every time you won a Mario Kart or a Crash Bandicoot Racing or a Forza race, you had to do another lap afterwards to actually count it as a win. Right? That's what you're asking Slay the Spire to do by being an easy infinite game. You're saying, hey, you've won the run, but do another lap, or we're not going to count it as a win. No one that wants to go through the motions. And when players aren't being challenged and they feel like they're going through the motions, the power fantasy can only exist for a very short amount of time before it becomes unfun. This is something I discussed in my previous videos about Ascension and previous videos about scarcity as an Ascension mechanic and things like that as well. If the game stops being challenging, it can only exist in that unchallenging state for a very short period of time before it becomes boring. Because it's all flat, it's all the same thing. Now, I'm not saying every fight in the game needs to be very, very difficult. You can have a mix of both. Sometimes your build is going to have an easy time of some fights, sometimes it's going to have a hard time of those fights. And that's what is also in there, enforcing build variety in the game and enforcing the notion that cards are different from each other, right? And I'll read you this review. This player put in 20 hours into the game and left a review on the 26th of March, which was 1 week after the initial Doormaker change. And they've put on 110 hours since then. So clearly, they've played 110 hours since leaving this negative review. It reads, cool premise, but the game is just a series of bad beats. Every character has a very narrow set of playable cards and strategies, and each of the enemies are perfectly designed to take down one of the character strategies. A win is less a well-played series of matches, and more just dodging the perfect counter enemies, but with the number of encounters per run, your chances are slim. So how has this player interpreted the game? This player has interpreted the game as a constructed deck builder where they are looking to define a set of playable, quote, cards. That's very Magic the Gathering coded, right? The card is playable or unplayable. No cards in Slay the Spire are unplayable. In fact, every card in Slay the Spire 2 is probably too good, frankly. This is why transforms are so good. The only card in the game that's unplayable are cards that literally read the text unplayable on them. But this player is viewing it through that perspective, and they're saying there's a very narrow set of playable cards and a very narrow set of playable strategies. There are enemies in the game that are designed to take down those player strategies. Cool. So they have identified that they do need to solve multiple issues, and they have identified that they do need to, approach different enemies in different ways. But the way this player has incorporated this, identification that there are enemies out there that can beat them into their gameplay is not to adjust their deck building strategy at all. It's to try and dodge these fights, It's to try and say, oh yeah, I'll make top 8 by dodging the Kiki Jiki decks. I'm playing stacks. I'll top 8 so long as I can dodge Zoo. That's not how Slay the Spire works. You can't go, 8-2 and make it to the end. You need to go 10-0. And so you need to build a deck that can beat every fight, or, you need to budget your HP across those fights that are bad matchups for you. Now, this player's played, over 100 hours since then. I'm sure they'll change their mind. But this is the second part of why a review bomb is malicious, right? Because this player has left a negative review as part of this idea that the game isn't meeting their expectation of being a constructed deck builder. And despite playing for over 5 times as long as when they left the review, they're not interested in updating that review. There's a lot of inertia there. And the inertia on negative reviews is one of the reasons why review bombers think that their strategy is worthwhile. So why do these players feel slighted? We'll look at a few different interpretations of the game and of the experience playing the game, both as itself and as the player's experience of it. And one of the ways to think about it is as runs as a journey. especially for new players who are in their first maybe 25 or 50 hours of the game before they've seen every relic and they've played with every card, or maybe had the opportunity to draft different cards in combination with each other. Players are exploring this, ocean of possibilities and learning about each different kind of strategy and learning about all these synergies. And they're in that sweet spot where everything is new and their understanding of the game is growing all the time. So they can learn really, really rapidly, and every piece of information they learn is, changing their opinion of the game really, really, really substantially. They're all big changes. There's nothing granular about these kind of learnings that they're making, because everything is new, and they can enjoy getting better at the game, as well as enjoy learning things and enjoy like having those eureka moments where they put things together. And that's a huge part of their enjoyment all at once. Should this player be playing an early access game? Probably not, because patch updates undermine our knowledge. Patch updates take that vast ocean that we've tracked behind us and the map that we've laid out there, and they're saying, no, your map is no longer accurate. We have changed this state of the game. So players who really, really enjoy the learning process and look at the game as something to be solved, and who disproportionately enjoy feeling a sense of mastery over a game, probably shouldn't play a game that is updating at the same time. But again, Slay the Spire has a massive reputation as one of the best strategy games, and Slay the Spire 2 is solving a lot of the criticisms that people had of Slay the Spire 1 of having mobile game style art, or of not having enough content or not enough variety. So Slay the Spire 2 has a lot more animations, it has an extra character, and it's got the promise of even more characters. It's got even more cards. It's got less ascension levels, so there's less of a grind. So there's more content, and those players who feel a need to reach Ascension 20 or reach the maximum, prescribed mastery of the game through the highest Ascension level, they see the game as less of a grind, so that the content to grind ratio is much, 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 much higher. And so the game has brought in a very large number of players all at once, and a lot of those players are looking to play the final version of Slay the Spire 2, in the same way that they're looking for the same reputation that Slay the Spire 1 has had for almost a decade. Well, Slay the Spire 1 was in early access and had patch releases for 18 months of its 9, 10 years, right? There's 8 years of reputation there that the player is looking for in Slay the Spire 2, and they're ignoring the early access updating patch cycle of the game. And that's what they're not enjoying about Slay the Spire 2. Well, the early access phase of Slay the Spire 1 is something that you had to experience to be there. The reputation that you're interpreting to choose Slay the Spire 2 as a good game for you is, everything after the early access phase. So maybe for Slay the Spire 2, you should look at returning to the game after the early access phase and after the official release. It's a completely understandable negative experience, especially if you disproportionately feel that sense of learning and mastery is a very, very strong positive. And if you do enjoy that about games, well, the game is in that phase. And runs are also stories, right? So players are experiencing the new game, the new world, the new characters, the new challenges, everything we we're just talking about. And sharing these stories with friends and in their multiplayer settings is very, very fun and very, very validating. You want to send your deck lists to your friend, or you want to sit down and co-op with your mates and say, oh, you should definitely take these cards in combination. Oh, no, look at the synergy here. And when you have that knowledge, when you have that experience of this combination, and you tell your friend and they go, oh, I see, that's how it works. That feels good. It feels good to teach people and share these tips and tricks with people. That's the advantage of posting on YouTube, right? Like it's something to be enjoyed. And patch updates again undermine our run history, right? You no longer have these runs to show off to your friends. You no longer have these experiences that you had with your friends and these stories about, this run was amazing that you can share with each other, right? The glow has changed, the card has changed, right? Or the card that you were looking for in your synergy has been taken out. Imagine you're playing co-op with your friend on Discord or something like that, and then you get to the end of Act 2 and you're like, wow, I just can't believe we haven't seen this card yet. It's an uncommon. Like normally you should see an uncommon if you take this many hallway fights. And then you get to the end of the run and it never appeared, and you look through the compendium and it wasn't there. because the card got removed from the game, 8 patches ago, and you didn't know. That's a very negative experience. I understand how it would ruin an experience of a game, and not just of the game, but of your co-op experience, coaching and playing with your friend. And so to this player, enjoying the game is also about accumulating these stories and accumulating these great flavor combinations and these tips and tricks about the game. And as these patches come around, we're gradually erasing this player's experience with the game and erasing what they've enjoyed and what they've learned about it. And it is like Arabian Nights, right? Eventually they're going to run out of stories, and the patches are eating away at those at the same time. So again, I can completely understand how that player would have a negative experience of the game because there are patches going. And again, this player is disproportionately feeling negative because it is a early access game. And runs their own unique little universes as well. Players love discovering these seeds. They have an incredible combination of cards, or they start with an incredible transform, or the first 4 hallway card reward screens put them in an incredibly unique kind of deck or unique synergy. Players discover these as they're playing, and they feel like it's a personalized experience, right? They're discovering these secret, uniquely special seeds. And, it gives them that thrilling, exciting, awesome feeling of discovery. And then they post that on Reddit, or they post that on the Discord, and they share their seed around, and they can take the seed and they can play the seed again and lean into the perfect pressure points deck, or the perfect claw deck, or the easy floor 3 infinite. I can't believe I got a rushdown infinite on floor 3. I had that the other day. I was playing the Watcher on Slay the Spire 1. And then after my 3rd hallway fight, I had 2 card removes from the Bird Statue and the Merchant, and I had Inner Peace, Tantrum, and Rushdown in the first 3 card rewards, and I was like, amazing. If this was early access Slay the Spire 1, I would have posted this seed and I would have said, you've got a reliable infinite before the first treasure chest. And if you have a hard time, with the Watcher, and you wanted to get that experience of of an infinite stance kind of deck on the Watcher, here's a seed where you can force it very, very early and then play the run, looking to solve those other problems that this kind of deck has, like solve some problems with artifacts so your talk to the hand goes off, or solve some problems with mental fortress so that you can get through the beat of death. These are very unique experiences for players, and then patch updates destroy those special worlds, right? So a player has a seed and they have their idea of this really, really unique seed and this game-breaking experience, and then a patch update comes and all of that's a wash. So those players who are looking for these really, really, really extreme experiences in the game, like a Pandora's box from Darv that changes all of their cards into claws, that is going to exist. People are going to share that seed, but only when the game is past early access is it going to stick. Up until that point, if you discover that seed, the game's going to update and that seed's no longer going to be there. So the patch updates and destroys these special worlds, and I completely understand. Again, for those players who are looking for these experiences, that feels bad. And Minecraft players have had this experience for a very, very, very long time. And what they do now is when they post a seed, they also paste the version number and whether it's Java or Bedrock, And so eventually the Slay the Spire 2 community is going to do that as well. Eventually we're going to be able to choose which patch we're playing on, or you'll be able to mod in the patch or whatever it might be, and you can play the seed in that way. Right now though, while the game doesn't have access to Workshop for modding, and while the game doesn't have rollback to previous patches, this type of player is going to have their experience negatively affected by patch updates. And here's a good example, right? This person posted to the Slay the Spire Reddit, genuinely the most blessed run, 2 hangs into Transfigure with a dredge that didn't exhaust. And so this player got the Leafy Poultice on floor 0 from Niao. The Leafy Poultice transformed a strike and a defend into 2 copies of Hang, and on floor 0 they had infinite scaling damage against every single fight in the game, and enough of it that they could still even take on hallway fights with this level of damage, right? And that feels great to start with a big aspect of the game solved, and then to go through the rest of the game trying to solve the rest of it. Again, it's like my example of, finding a floor 3 infinite on the Watcher. Your damage is solved. Now do the rest of it. And, on this thread, there were lots of other people posting that they had played the seed as well, and this is how they went about it. And so because of this early access phase, you do get these reviews like this, right? Please stop updating this game. With every update, the game gets more broken. Every patch, they nerf or remove good cards and buff enemies. As someone who can't spend 15 hours a day grinding out a strategy, it isn't a fun experience anymore. Maybe Megacrit can stop listening to the 10 streamers who complain about the game being too easy and can start appealing to literally everyone else. And why I'm highlighting these reviews is that they are talking about every patch being negative for them, and this is why there are so many negative reviews every time a patch comes around. These players do not want to play an early access game. They do not want to play a game where, as they attempt to get better at it, the game changes underneath them. Yeah, and this bottom review, the player blames the ivory tower, right? Like they're blaming the idea that somebody who's playing even more than they are, and they've got 212 hours at the time of review, 238 hours afterwards. Like, that's not a small amount of time. It's definitely going to be in the top 1% of players. They're complaining that somebody else is spending 16 hours a day grinding out a strategy. And they're complaining that Megacrit is listening to them and not me, who is just a top 1% playtime player, not a top 0.1% playtime player. It kind of betrays the conceit, right? Like, they just don't want the game changing. And the irony is that without the game changing, without the game getting more difficult, they probably just would have gotten bored instead of leaving a negative review, right? Like, so instead of leaving a negative review for for the updates making the game more difficult, instead at 500 hours, they could leave a negative review. Oh, it's great. It's fun to explore. I found that after a long time, I'm always doing the same few strategies. And so, I would have liked the game to, make other strategies more valid. I don't like that the meta is so clearly defined, right? You see these reviews in Magic the Gathering all the time. Oh, I don't like that the metagame is all artifacts. Oh, I don't like that the metagame is just Splinter Twin. Oh, I don't like that the metagame is just Abzan, right? If something in the game is too good, people don't want to play. And maybe it's fun for a short time, for 16 or 20 or 100 hours, but that's all down to their personal tolerance. The key thing is that the game is unbalanced and unchallenging. A player's tolerance for an unbalanced or unchallenging game is just a reflection on the player. The game still has the problem. And so this player made it 200 hours without getting bored of easy infinites. Maybe they would have made 500 hours, but eventually they would have. Eventually they would be in the same position as their top 10 streamers complaining about the game being too easy. They're just not there yet. This is complaining about the roadworks because the government and the local council is listening to the top 10 road users, the truckers and the taxi drivers and the tram operators. And they're complaining about the roadworks because they haven't got to the congestion yet. But when they reach the congestion, they would be complaining about the congestion. And look, power fantasy in media is not a new thing. It's been done to death as far as we can see. I think the power fantasy meta has very much taken over a lot of the volume of media, certainly not the quality of media though, although power fantasies don't necessarily have low quality. Players are enjoying an experience of power fantasy within this incredible strategy framework, right? Like, the game is still incredibly good with the rest of this strategy framework. There's still a lot of characters, there's still a lot of variety, there's still a lot of interesting designs, a lot of interesting art, a lot of interesting encounters, a lot of interesting mechanics. It's still fun to play the game. But these updates are eroding the journey behind us, and these card nerfs are taking powerful tools away, and the enemy buffs are watering down the player fantasy. And again, I want to say that's a completely fair critique of a piece of media that offers itself to the player or the viewer as a power fantasy. If Kirito in Season 2, Episode 6 or whatever, suddenly got stripped of all his abilities and got beaten up by a level 1 scrub, that would feel bad. But guess what? Slay the Spire 2 is not a power fantasy. And so what's happening here? Kind of, as mentioned, a lot of the issues that these players are finding with the game is because it's an early access game. And the reality is that an early access game is effectively a live service game. So look at your WoW, look at your Genshins, look at your Arknights, any of these kind of things. They've got regular meta changes, they've got planned major updates, they've got a highly active online community, and also a strong sense of player ownership of their character journey. Now, what's the character journey in Slay the Spire? It's your perceived skill of the game. It's your sense of the strategy space and what kind of cards you prefer to play with and your identity with certain cards. Some people think that their ownership of the game is their win rate or their longest streak, or their predicted percentage chance to win at any point in time. You see these on YouTube all the time. I win almost all of my runs on this character, how I got to 25 streak, why I'm 96% win rate on Necrobinder or whatever. Now, these players are definitely hamming it up for the clicks and hamming it up for the YouTube, but the regular player also thinks that way to a certain degree, right? If a player loses 6 runs in a row, it's kind of hard to avoid the question of whether or not you have a strong sense of the game. And that challenges the player's sense of ownership of the game because it's a strategy game. And so players who play their strategies feel a sense of ownership over their strategies. I played stacks for the longest time in every single format. I still have a stack CDH deck. It's very, very, very low power level, and really it only punishes players who are playing strong cards like tutors or infinite combos or things like that. But I still have a very strong sense of ownership over that strategy. I identify as a stacks player. And maybe we aren't going to verbalize it to that extent in Slay the Spire, but somebody might say, I'm a silent main. Somebody might say, yeah, I'm a footwork gamer. Somebody might say, oh, I love decisions. It's my favorite card. I win with it all the time. And so because unlike a game like Genshin, where characters are never nerfed, characters are never changed after the fact unless it's advantageously, these players, because they have a sense of ownership over their strategies, and it's a live service game, changes to the strategy space are perceived as undermining their ownership of the game. They could just play earlier patches, but then they would be separate from the live version of the game, so it'd be separating from the community. I do understand, it's a rock and a hard place to choose between, but it's because of a fundamental misunderstanding of what the game is. I'll read you this review. This person has 200 plus hours on records again. Do you guys not have phones? A Blizzard developer said this in 2018 when Blizzard tried to push users towards its first mobile game. As one of the best game companies in the world, Blizzard seemed to believe they could teach their users to play the way they wanted. The mobile game did make some money, but it damaged their brand, because they betrayed their users. I love card games, especially ones like Gwent, not ones like Hearthstone. I prefer games where I can fully control the deck I build. Even if I have bad luck, as I often do, I can still make my deck work. Your updates remove the deck consistency. If I was told the game would be like this a month ago, I wouldn't have paid for it. What I like about the previous version was freedom. I could choose small or large deck. I could go for consistency or I could gamble on RNG. That was my choice. Now it feels like you've decided for me. Small decks are not cool, so we're going to make them harder to build. Go play large decks and enjoy RNG. Do not teach me how to play the game. So this player, they are explaining that they like card games. They view Slay the Spire as a deck builder game. Again, it's not. It's a dungeon crawler that uses deck building as a game mechanic. They've identified that Slay the Spire 2 Early Access is a live service game, which is why they're likening it to World of Warcraft and like Blizzard. And they're explaining that they feel that their sense of ownership of the game is their identification of a strategy. They perceive the updates as attacking their discovered strategy space of small decks and forcing the user to choose a strategy space of large deck. And this player is they're explaining very explicitly that their review is a negative review because they want to explore one version of a strategy game that is all about construction and all about deck consistency. And because they have misinterpreted Slay the Spire 2 as a constructed deck builder, or as a drafting game where the goal is to be as close to a constructed deck as possible, and because they refuse to acknowledge that deck transformation and deck scaling is part of the intended strategy space, like they're saying, you've decided for me that you need to play big decks now. No one said you needed to play big decks. You can play Spectrum Shift, you can play Transforms, you could use colorless generation cards. You could use a potion to create a card in combat. You could use Nightmare. You could use Stoke. You could use Creative AI. There is no reason to think that the only way to solve something like the Doormaker is to build a big deck of cards, because you're going to cycle through it so many times that you need to be able to exhaust all your cards before you lose the fight. That's like saying to somebody that, you're going to mill their good cards. Anyone who's ever played Magic the Gathering knows that the notion of milling their good cards is nonsense. There is no game theoretical way in which that matters. And so this player is leaving a negative review because they have misunderstood what the intent of the game is. And then when the game is being updated to be more in line with the authorial intent, they are refusing to acknowledge that they misunderstood, and they're accusing the developers of being elitist and prescribing players how to play. Now, there are very, very successful games that prescribe players how to play. In League of Legends, like, if you go to the wrong lane, you don't get gold. Like, in modern World of Warcraft, like, you could bind your entire character rotation to one button, because that's not what the game's about. And that's why World of Warcraft Classic exists, so that both the player who fell in love with the initial version of the game and the player who's come along for the whole ride and enjoys the retail version of the game can both play. And so I want to define and introduce an idea here called author function. Now, it's not so much like a philosophy or an ethical framework or like a moralism or anything like that. It's just a tool. The author function is a tool for classifying discourse about a text. And by discourse, I mean everything from reviews of the game up until public perception of a game through something like marketing, right? So author functions, they're introduced by Foucault, and what they are, they're classifications that they're constructed to provide support for the system of property, so like legal ownership and copyright and liability of an intellectual property or a text. Cultural review mechanism for classifying the discourse, which is what I'm doing here. I'm classifying the discourse that we're having about the game, and I'm evaluating whether or not reviews of the game are valid or not. Operationality, so that this means that the reviewers determine the boundaries and the themes of the text, and that's what review bombers try and challenge, right? They're trying to present that their review and their complaint and their issues should be within the scope of the discourse about the text, in this case the text being Slay the Spire 2. And the author function is also independent, so it's irrelevant to the actual author. And that is sensible. You probably don't think about who out there is directing an individual Marvel movie. It's just enough that it is a Marvel movie. And so when we're thinking about something like the statement, do not teach me how to play the game, well, the game is a living piece of artistic media. It's not a chore. You don't need training on how to do it. There's no one evaluating you about how you're playing the game. No one's giving you KPIs to meet. It's art. Secondly, the game is created, published, and owned by Megacrit. So actually, if they did want to teach you how to play the game, give you like a daily checklist, win a run on the Watcher, draft a deck with 3 rare cards, defeat the Act 2 boss with an attack, win an Ascension 8 or above run, they could do that if they wanted to. They create, publish, and own the game. That's well within the author's right as the property owners under the system of property. And this review is essentially a complaint that the individual player doesn't own the game and aren't the game designers. Which, if you've ever streamed or if you've ever written a piece of work or if you've ever published a piece of art, that's what most complaints come down to. Most complaints are that I could have done it better. Most complaints are telling the author how to do what they're already doing. Most complaints are my 6-year-old could have painted that. We'll circle back around. So how is this author function tool applied to a video game? Well, we have the developer studio and we have the publishers, the brands. We have the copyright holders. They determine the rights. They determine the canon. In the case of Megacrit, and in the case of a lot of pieces of work, we also have these auteur elevated personnel, like the director, the composer, the designer, and the setting history. So in Elden Ring, the setting, the world, had narrative construction by George Martin. A Song of Ice and Fire, rather, is the auteur in the context of the setting of Elden Ring. You could have a director like Kurosawa or Kubrick or Tarantino, right? The director being an auteur is often enough to elevate the movie into being watchable by itself. And the same is true of like an author. If you like Dan Brown novels, you will probably like the other Dan Brown novels. It could be a composer like John Williams, or it could be a character designer, or it could be a setting designer, or it could be an artist who has lent a style guide or created a style guide for the rest of the art team. It could be a lead designer, somebody like Todd Howard or Mark Rosewater. You know, if Mark Rosewater is the lead designer on the Magic the Gathering set, it has a different kind of expectation and a different author function to if the set was designed by the B team. And for big publishings like this, for video games, the credits are irrelevant. It takes hundreds of people to make video games, even a lot of indie games. Someone like Local Funk for Balatro, or like Concerned Ape for Stardew Valley. You know, that we interpret the work as being their entire creative authority and their authorship of the work, of the art of the game. But they, went on to Fiverr and bought music and bought copyright rights for music or had other people work on it. They went on to GitHub, or they went on to the forums for their gaming engine and for coding looking for tips or tricks or questions on how to code things. They used game creator software. They had lots of tools and lots of importable different modules to lean into their game with. This is not to detract from anything that they've done for the game or to say, well, it takes a village or this person's work isn't irrelevant. It's just to acknowledge that when we think about something like Stardew Valley, we think about Concerned Ape. We don't think about the rest of the credits, that should or shouldn't be made. We don't think about any of that. Like, you have to go out of your way to think about the rest of that in the background, even if you asked, an indie dev, what help did you have making the game? Who out there was a great resource for you? They might refer to an old coffee table workbook that they were really heavily inspired by. They might refer to a coding platform or a subreddit or a Discord site or like an open source game where somebody else had released their code and they can say, yeah, this was incredibly impactful for me. It made things much easier. I was able to borrow the template or learn how to do this from another game and implement that into my own design. Are these creditable? No. Do these people deserve credit for helping make the game? No. Right? That's not the claim. But what the claim is that when we think about a video game with an auteur, we think about it as them. We think about all creative decisions as them. The other credits are irrelevant. Likewise, if people have an experience on the game that's to do with their hardware or to do with their screen fidelity or to do with mods they've implemented, we don't view that as legitimate. We don't view it as within the author function. If you mod the hell out of your Civ 6, so you're playing with Pokemon and Genshin Impact characters and Touhou characters, and then you're like, oh yeah, the balance of the game is really, really rough. The matchup between Princess Peach and Napoleon is so one-sided. It's like, well, what the devs meant to do with that? It's Civ Maya's Civilization 6, not 16 random modders and your mod pack Civilization 6. Game performance on inappropriate devices isn't really part of the review scheme. If somebody has a device that should play the game really well, and there are programming and optimization issues and memory allocation issues in the game, yes, sure, absolutely. But if somebody's trying to play a movie on a Game Boy, their review of the movie doesn't make any sense anymore, right? If somebody is watching on a black and white screen or on a damaged screen, if they're reviewing a movie, they're like, oh yeah, the color grading of the movie was bad the whole way through. You're going through someone's Letterboxd history and every single movie has color grading issues. Have you considered getting a new screen? Right? Well, that's for video games and for interactive art in general. What is it for Slay the Spire 2? Well, for Slay the Spire 2, the author function, the set of things that make up the boundaries of the text of this Slay the Spire 2 is the legal rights holders, the official community managers, participants on social media like on Reddit and on the Discord, content creators like on YouTube and Twitch, reviewers, journalist reviewers, word of mouth reviewers, Steam reviews, and active players, people in co-op lobbies or people on the speedrun boards. This is the space where Slay the Spire 2 exists at this stage. But I want you to notice what's not included there. What's not included is general public consumers of the game, even people who own the game now but who aren't active in any of these places. And what about places where people could be active that we haven't included here? Well, at the end of the day, there are legal rights holders to the game and official community managers and official social media sites. The legal rights holders do get to put a strict boundary on what is the discourse of the game. That is the author function. And so what are the boundaries that they've presented? Well, they've given them to us. Why are we in early access? Slay the Spire requires a lot of player feedback so we can balance content, add quality of life features, and make sure the game runs without issues. Early access is also a chance for us to test experimental features, try exotic designs, identify niche problems, and help us make sure the game is headed in the right direction. So this is a statement from the developers about why early access is happening. This is them explaining the boundaries of the discourse of the game. How are you planning on involving the community in your development process? We'll primarily be listening to feedback in our Discord server, but we'll also be monitoring other social media to see what's going well and what's going poorly. The game will also include the gathering of anonymized metrics and an in-game feedback tool to help players provide feedback. Again, this is the developers outlining the limits of discourse of the game. At the end of the day, they have that strict determination, that legal determination of where the boundary is, and they're explaining that this is the boundary. Social media, our Discord server, anonymous metrics, and the feedback tool in-game. Let's summarize these from the perspective of author function. The early access period is there to assist Megacrit Games and the auteurs, Casey and Anthony, to collect reports of technical issues. Now, this is media quality related. Typos, editing in the game. If this was a book or if this was a movie, it would be if this frame is incorrect, or if the cut isn't right, or if this frame has, focus issues. If it was a book, it would be about editing. It would be, this sentence repeats itself. This word is spelt incorrectly. This is just media issues. Improving quality of life features. Now, this one is audience related. They're saying that they want to make sure that the audience has these quality of life features. That's about accessibility. It's about the size of the general audience and making sure that more people can access the art, can play the game in a way that's convenient for them and accessible for them. They want to try exotic designs and experiments. Now, this one is scope related. They're testing to see what the boundaries of the gameplay will be and what the boundaries of the player experience will be. They want early access to be a place where they can experiment with the scope of the game. And they also want to ensure adherence to artistic vision. They said they want to make sure the game's going in the right direction. This is aesthetic related. They have these aesthetic goals for the game. They want the game to sit in a specific place amongst, other kinds of media and have it fulfill certain roles as a game. They have an artistic vision for that for that aesthetic outcome. And that's not something that's going to be challenged on, right? Early access is for them to make sure the game is going in that direction. It's not for them to be challenged on that direction. The early access is there to make sure that the game is going in the direction of their artistic vision, not in some other direction. And it's for them to monitor discourse and game stats, right? And so that's authority related. It's there for them to enforce their artistic authority as the game rights owners and as the auteurs of the game. They want to make sure that their vision is enforced on the piece of art. The discourse isn't going outside the scope, and that the game statistics don't represent some other kind of game that they don't have a vision of. And so as a reminder, participation in an early access is a product in its own right? We're not playing Slay the Spire 2, the official released game. We're playing the early access version of the game, and that is, the product is the process. Just like any other live service games like WoW or like Final Fantasy or Uma Musume or Grand Theft Auto servers, early access MMO live service games, they are unstable media. They are changing. And discourse about the art and the process defines the scope of that author function. They have that authority to define the scope, and they have the authority to keep you within it. Participation in the author function defines that community membership, right? If you want to participate in the design of the game towards the artistic goals, then you're a member of that. If you don't want to engage with the game in line with the artistic vision and denying of the authority of the creators and the auteurs, well, you're not, by definition, you're not participating in community membership. And really, just to drive this point home, maybe an exercise here, I'll categorize Slay the Spire as a piece of literature, as a piece of art, as a piece of living media, and then we can see whether or not different reviews or different interpretations of it might, fall within even just a very loose categorization, right? So in literature, it's a fairly broad and loose categorization, but there is one here. Typically, conflict falls into three types. There's conflict with nature, there's conflict with man, and there's conflict with oneself. And when we break this down further into classical and modern and postmodern, we can generalize to man versus nature, man versus society, and man versus technology. We can also generalize to man versus man versus self, and man versus reality. And we can also generalize to man versus God, man versus no God, and man versus the author. And so when you're viewing a piece of media like a game or a text or a movie or a short story, you might be thinking, which theme, which broad basket of themes is this conflict falling into? And in the case of Slay the Spire and Slay the Spire 2, narratively, it's a journey through an aggressive wilderness, battling ever-escalating enemies while improving your character power. So it's a man versus nature conflict in the narrative. And this is a very, very, very common kind of narrative. Sometimes it's capstoned with man versus God. In the JRPG, you start by killing slimes and then you get stronger and stronger and stronger, and all of a sudden you're killing God or something like that, right? So it's not also always as smooth as man just versus nature, but all your survivor games, all your zombie games, all your wilderness games, and Slay the Spire is too. It's very, very common in games where the character can increase in power to present it as a fight versus the natural world and overcoming the natural world and getting stronger and stronger as a result. Playing Slay the Spire experientially is a learning experience full of experimentation and trials and learning techniques and hurdles and improving. It's a man versus self. The experience, if you were to categorize the experience of being a Slay the Spire player, it's man versus self. And this is why a lot of players who are seeing the patches update and change their experience of the game and change the lessons that they've learned along the way are leaving negative reviews. It's completely valid, but ignores the fact that it is an early access changing game. This is the conceit of the roguelike genre as a whole. The whole point is that you, the player, are getting better. Your character isn't necessarily. And, that goes down to roguelites as well. And it goes down to even sometimes RPGs like Dark Souls, an action RPG. Anyone who says, you can outscale or just stat check a fight in Dark Souls is probably incorrect, because realistically, there's no way that even a max power character within the constraints of the game can beat a boss by playing badly, right? Even a max power character needs to have a player who is willing to learn the fight a little bit to win the fight. And the character progression there, the RPG elements, are very much like a sliding scale of how punishing your skill difference is going to be. If you've ever done like a level 1 Dark Souls run or a 0 damage Dark Souls run, it's very similar to like streaking in Slay the Spire, right? A level 1 Dark Souls run that might come down to this idea that you can avoid damage from the boss for 45 seconds for 3 rotations, but then on the 4th rotation you make a mistake and you take damage and you're on level 1, and so you immediately die. But the fact that you're on level 1 also means that you need to survive the fight for 25 rotations because you just have that little damage. A player could do 1 rotation damage free. A player who's slightly better could do 2 rotations damage free. A good player could do 5 rotations damage free. And maybe they have enough damage that they no damage a boss by killing it within 5 rotations. Well, maybe that player couldn't do 25 rotations in a row without dying. And maybe that's why they can no damage a fight when they have a +4 Zweihander or a Black Knight's Halberd +3, but they can't no damage a fight when they have a +0 club and a level 1. So roguelikes and then roguelites and then difficult RPGs, they're kind of giving the player this sliding scale of how punishing the skill difference is going to be, or how punishing the mistakes are going to be. But you can very much get through them without making mistakes at the same time. And the player journey is making less mistakes and improving at the game. Let's add early access to the mix though. Well, what is the early access element of the game? Well, it kind of enters the territory. The meta game that we're playing here, the game of experiencing Slay the Spire within early access, is a man versus author appeal, right? Participating in Slay the Spire 2 as a community member is about reviewing your experience and contributing within the author function. And so in many ways, it's expected that people will leave reviews trying to tell the authors to change something that they want to see, because that's like leaving an ultimatum for somebody to change their behavior, right? This is like leaving a review for a cafe saying they don't have oat milk, I'm not coming back until they have oat milk. Well, their decision to get oat milk or not, it's probably not, about whether or not they want your sale. It's probably about fridge space, barista training. It's probably about a budget for their stock. It might be about whether their supplier has oat milk to give them. Maybe they're on a single supplier contract and they receive cow's milk and they receive soy milk, but their supplier doesn't have an oat milk option. And so you're leaving a complaint that really the cafe, all they can do with it is they can send an email to their supplier and they can say, oh, hey, some people want to see oat milk. And the supplier can say, oh yeah, we're working on that. We also need oat milk suppliers for our distribution company. So some things are not as simple as just yelling at the author about, but that is very much what the game of man versus author is about, right? We want to see more infinites. I want to have a stronger player power fantasy. I want to get all the game achievements quickly. I want to be able to play all my runs with this playstyle. Like if I could improve the amount of runs that start with Grand Finale, I would. I made a video about how I thought Ascension 7 should go because I want to start more runs with rare cards that are build-arounds because I think rare cards suck and are usually worse than commons, and that having an Ascension level, which makes it harder to get rare cards, actually makes the game easier, again, because rare cards on average suck. And seeing more rare cards doesn't make your game easier. But what it does in turn do is it removes one of the player experiences that I want, which is to get a niche card relatively early in your run and then try and make that niche card work by building towards it. So I'm also participating in this man versus author discourse. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm also putting out videos saying, hey, I want this part of the game to change for me and my selfish interests. But the difference here is whether or not the review is within the scope of the artistic vision. I think that my suggested changes are within the scope of the artistic vision as they've laid out publicly. Now, maybe it's not. Maybe they just haven't said everything there is. Maybe, my feedback never gets seen. And maybe the people who watch my videos hear the feedback, or they don't necessarily agree with it, or it's not really striking with them, and so they don't verbalize it again, and the idea doesn't promulgate. A consensus is never reached on this specific topic, and then, Casey and Anthony as the auteurs never see it. But discourse that's within the scope of the author function that never gets seen is different from discourse that is outside the scope of the author function that is trying to vie control away from the point of the media. And, these things are all ongoing. The design, the theme, strategy style, the experience of playing Slay the Spire 2 is ongoing. Criticism of the gameplay experience is welcome and solicited in early access, right? That's what they've said. They want criticism of the gameplay experience. And fully participating in the early access portion of the game does mean occasionally pressing F2 and leaving our thoughts. That is the mechanism that the developers have put in the game for us to provide feedback. And fully participating in the early access community as a member of the author function does mean occasionally putting our thoughts into the F2 function there. Again, it's about scope. Scope within the provided mechanisms, a scope within the provided aesthetic vision, and scope within the realm of gameplay that is offered by the game. People often criticize AAA games because they have every single playstyle in them all at once. They could appeal to literally as many players as possible. Anyone who picks up this game will find a way to play it. The game has both a racing minigame and a farming minigame, and there's resource collection, and there's like an action campaign, and there's 300 minutes of narrative cutscenes. Something that happens is that these developer houses and publishers get feedback over and over and over again. Complaints about how they don't want this, how they don't want that. Complaints about, oh, this game was missing this feature. And their response to it is to make sure that those features are always available, which is exactly why these games are so bloated and exactly why these AAA games are so expensive. It is not a strict advantage for the game to have more. And, in the case of Slay the Spire 2, Casey has talked about bringing the Ascension level maximum down from 20 to 10 because they want to have more characters. In Slay the Spire 1, there was 80 Ascensions worth of gameplay, 84 if you account Ascension 0. And if we have 5 or 6 or 10 characters in Slay the Spire 2 with Ascension 20, well, then there's going to be 210 layers of Ascension to, beat the game, to quote unquote beat the game and beat all Ascension levels. So just having more isn't always better. It can really ruin the player experience at the same time by drawing the game outside of its scope. And so, like, feedback and criticism and negative reviews that are trying to drag the game outside of its artistic vision are doing just that. They are just arguments with the authors about what kind of game you want to play. And there are other games. So yes, the authorial intention for player experience of Slay the Spire 2 is stated. It's well stated. The criticism of the authorial intent is outside the scope of author function. You're just arguing with the developers. You're just arguing with the auteurs about what the game they should be making is. That's like telling me to go get a different job. It's like telling, a parent to go have different children. That's not the point. They're working on what they're working on. And we can just lump these into a pile of 10 years of bandwagoners begging for a new World of Warcraft. I really, really appreciate that, World of Warcraft players are looking for that same experience as they always have. They move on like locusts to every new game that's remotely going to be good. They've done it to Slay the Spire 2 as well, and just bandwagoned on to the game being good because of its prior reputation and because of its Steam scores and because of its Steam player count. These criticisms from these players who have picked up the game because it's novel, who don't understand, who have become part of the early access process for a very different kind of game than they want, they are just leaving negative reviews for those reasons. And just like people telling the devs to make WoW again, the scope of discourse around Slay the Spire 2 is well defined. Criticism of the scope of discourse is just discourse about discourse, and it's irrelevant. And that's what this video is too, right? This video is discourse about the discourse about the discourse. It's so far away from Slay the Spire 2, this is why it applies to every other game. We can just lump all of these in with 15 years of arguing about Kusuge and easy modes, Some games are difficult, and that is within the artistic vision, and no amount of telling the authors what to do is going to change that. Now, some games are difficult because they are badly designed, badly programmed, and the hitboxes don't work. Some games are difficult because it is authorial intent. Well, there's no point either way of telling these authors, how to make their game. If they're bad at making games, it doesn't matter to tell them to make, a different kind of game. If somebody can't cook, it doesn't matter if they're trying to fry an egg or make a beef Wellington or some fine gastronomical experience. They need to learn how to fry an egg first. Or if the author does know what they're doing and they've made a hard game on purpose, then you just need to accept that. That's their authorial vision. And no amount of telling them what to do is going to change that. And thirdly, community participation expectations of Slay the Spire 2 are very clear and very egalitarian. Criticism of the community boundaries, they are naive and they're ultimately nothing more than disruptive. And anyone arguing about what we can talk about or what we can't talk about, or, my post got banned and that's unfair, or my feedback got removed, we can just lump these in with 20 years of people crying about bans for saying slurs. The community boundaries and what is acceptable discourse and what is acceptable participation is very well defined. And if people are being banned or ignored or removed or blocked for participating in ways that are naive and disruptive, that's how it should work, and they should be removed. And there's no amount of arguing, there's no amount of unban requests or DMing people on the Discord that's going to change that. And so let's get stuck into, I suppose, the controversial part of this particular video, the off-topic reviews. Now, the off-topic reviews of Slay the Spire 2 have come in for one very, very specific reason, and I will tell you what the reason is, and I'm sure you may have already heard about the reason, but I do want to create a bit more of a framework here before we get really stuck in. A third place is a public place where communities can collect. These third places are defined by Ray Oldenburg and Karen Christensen in their book, The Great Good Place, in, I want to say 89 or 90. And they lay out a set of criteria for a place to exist in the public as an extension of their home, as an extension of their work. So there's this model here for places that people exist in their day-to-day lives. There's the first place, which is their home. There's the second place, which is their workplace. And then there's these third places. And these third places need to meet these criteria. They need to be open and inviting. So people need to be able to come and go as they please with no invitation needed. They need to be comfortable and informal. so people feel welcome to visit there, and people feel welcome to stay there as well. So there's no formalities that they need to abide to. They don't need to wear specific kinds of dress or follow particular rules. They can just be comfortable there. It should be convenient, so people should be able to visit quite often. If a third place is a long way away, or if they need to jump through loopholes to get invitations to go there, it's no longer convenient. So they need to be able to visit often and easily. It needs to be unpretentious. There need to be no fancy requirements. Again, people can come and go as they please. Maybe there's a minimal dress code, the same that you might expect for the dress code of leaving the house. Or maybe there's an expectation of, buying something there, But it needs to be easy and unpretentious and informal to come and use this space. The barriers can't be too high. They need to be regulars, there needs to already be people there, and it needs to be the kind of place where whenever you go, it will be open and there'll be other people there to participate with. And it needs to be conversational. Conversation needs to be the main thing that happens there. Discussion needs to dominate the activities. Lastly, it needs to be lighthearted. People need to know that jokes and banter there are encouraged, and people need to be coming here with a sense of fun, right? People come here to have fun and to have lighthearted discussion. So this generalizes to online spaces as well. And many games have done very, very well by becoming third spaces to their community members, right? Like World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft predates social media, and it was a third space for those people who fell in love with the game. They could, there was no invitation needed. They could come and play anytime. Anyone could buy the game and log on. It was comfortable and informal. They could play in the comfort of their own home. It was convenient. They could log on as often as they wanted. It was unpretentious. People could be there all the time, level 1 or level 30. They didn't need to buy character packs. They didn't need to buy certain skin sets or things like that. There were always regulars. There were always people online, and people always chose servers with higher populations as well to play on. It was conversational. In any of these chat forums or in any of these global chats or area chats, conversation was always the main thing they were doing. World of Warcraft is a game about grinding, and grinding gets boring fairly quickly, and so anywhere that you go in the world, the actual gameplay itself was a secondary feature or a secondary task to the conversation. And it was also very lighthearted. People expected to be able to make jokes and have fun and goof on the game. Nowadays, there are third places that have replaced something like World of Warcraft, and other games have tried to be third place as well. But, of course, social media came along, like Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, and then and maybe as an example of how you can lose third place status, rather than talking about WoW and WoW's problems, let's talk about Twitter. Twitter was a third place. It was all these things, and then it stopped being a third place. And why did it stop? It was no longer open and inviting. You could go on Twitter, but you needed to pay to get verification. It was no longer comfortable and informal. Like the Twitter moderators stopped moderating. They were actively removed. And all of a sudden, no matter where you were on the platform, you probably weren't comfortable because radical discourse was available all the time. It stopped being convenient, right? Twitter did its absolute best to make being on Twitter as addictive and as engagement bait as possible. And so going on Twitter stopped being convenient because you would spend way too much time there, and it will also ruin your mood. And it stopped being unpretentious, right? Twitter started borrowing these really specific styles of content that would do well, that would get promoted to people, and you would no longer see the people in your feed who you wanted to follow. Instead, you would see recommended algorithmically driven rage bait posts, and all of them had the same style of content. And all of a sudden, if you wanted to start a conversation, or if you wanted to, participate in the discourse, unless you were following a really specific style, it would gain zero traction. And if the point there is to be conversational, you could no longer be conversational because all you were doing was generating content for the Twitter machine. And so people wouldn't talk to you if you were just posting, I saw this movie, I thought it was good. Oh, I love the new design of this character. Instead, the only movie discourse that you're going to find on Twitter these days is about how AI is going to crush Hollywood and how every movie is either woke or anti-woke. And so it removed all the regulars. Regular people got forced off the platform. You stopped seeing any regular posts from any regular people. They couldn't get seen even by their followers, and you weren't seeing them, and so they just dried up and they stopped logging on. And of course, the lighthearted bants and jokes of the platform completely disappeared because the entire timeline, the entire feed was replaced with nothing but rage bait and angry discourse and debates about whether or not certain people should be allowed to live. it became the most toxic cesspool of any other place on the internet, and it's no longer a third space. Elon Musk, in changing it to X, told people, no, this is how you play the game now. Rage bait and AI slop. And so it's no longer a third space for the public, it's a space for people who want to post rage bait and AI slop. And no one sensible who's just a member of the general public goes there, ever. What does this have to do with Slay the Spire? Well, in order to participate in the author function, the collaborating participants, we, the players and the early access players, we have to have access to that online third space. Without open access to digital third places, there can be no community consensus, and therefore there can be no author consensus dialogue, and the team can only use direct reports and game statistics to design their game. Now, if there wasn't forums and if there wasn't Discord and there wasn't player feedback, do I have faith that the developers could make a game that's as close to their authorial vision as possible? Yes, of course. But in all the 90s and all the 2000s, before forums and before, large playtesting events like this, games would come through with bugs. And it's fairly common to look at a 90s game, and even though the play space is really well defined, for like one particular weapon or one particular glitch to be completely broken and completely break the rest of the game. So much classic speedrunning is built on these breaks, where players can abuse glitches or abuse things that weren't fully tested by the developers and go against their authorial vision to break the game open and finish in like less than 4 minutes or something like that. Does that mean that a game that can be finished in less than 4 minutes is bad? No, obviously not. It just means that this player feedback, this pipeline between the community consensus and the auteurs operating the game needs to be well constructed, or we can have things like this happen. We can have breakdowns, we can have glitches, we can have broken strategies. And we saw that on day one of Slay the Spire 2. Slay the Spire 2 has been in development for years without early access, and within 1 week of being seen by the players, we were winning over 85% of runs with infinites, right? And so our community online spaces, our third places, they are a necessary subset of the author function, participating, as early access players with the developers. And then the author function is a subset of the marketable audience. The point of the author function is to exist in this space where it can be viewed and interpreted by the general audience, and they can decide whether or not they want to pay for the game. The author function is presented to the general audience as the brand. You probably don't think at all about who individually brews Victoria Bitter or insert your favorite beer. The way we interpret Victoria Bitter, which is a beer, is as a brand, and that brand is attached to rugby players. That brand is attached to slogans and jingles about a hard-earned thirst. Stella Artois is attached to marketing about Christmas. It's presented as a family drink. Is there a fundamental difference between either the content, the experience of drinking a beer like Victoria Bitters or a beer like Stella Artois? No, they're both beers. They're both similar percentages. They have similar flavor profiles. One of them is a bit more hoppy, the other one is a bit more lagerish, a little bit sweeter. That's a very intricate difference, right? That's the difference between playing Marlians in Age of Empires 2 or Celts in Age of Empires 2. Either way, it's Age of Empires 2, which is Age of Empires, which is RTS, which is a video game. It's so many scopes down in the public consciousness. Brand is the way that these things are presented to public consciousness, and branding could be of any kind of branding. Branding could be family and holiday oriented. Branding could be sports and masculinity oriented. Branding could be feminist oriented, like Smirnoff has this Equalizer campaign promoting vodka to women on feminist principles. Branding could be lifestyle and lifestyle aspirations oriented, right? They're going to try and sell this ute with all these features about how you can go off road and ride a bike and help out your friends or family with moving furniture and things like that. And branding could be about selling individuality back to the consumer. Of course, it's a paradox. Of course, the notion of a big brand selling you an individual lifestyle is nonsense. But Game Boy did this back in the 90s, and then Apple did it in the 2010s, and then Apple did it in the 2000s, and then Apple did it in the 2010s, and then Apple did it in the 2020s. Selling somebody a sense of individuality through personal expression of the product, or the sense that the kind of person who owns this product is cool or is avant-garde or is smart is such a common thing. Seriously, watch an ad for a bank one day and just ask yourself the question, does this bank want me to believe that I'm a smart person for choosing them? right? Are they trying to fluff that I'm 160 IQ financial genius with, 45 years of experience in predicting the future of markets? Is that what they want me to think about myself and feel that way for choosing this bank? I guarantee you that if you look for this kind of advertising in a bank, for example, that's all you're going to see because it is a very particular style. And this is what the author function is to the general audience. And that's why it's important that Slay the Spire is currently in its early access phase. At the end of its early access phase, when Slay the Spire starts to get marketing around it and starts to get, full release reviews by games journalists and in meta aggregators and Metacritic scores and billboards, on the highway and ad spots on the train and things like that. Everything that the developers like Megacrit and the auteurs like Casey and Anthony and that we, like the engaged player base, have done to design this game is going to be flattened down into like a brand. And the brand is what's going to be presented to the general audience. And there are people out there in the world who do not like this. There are people out there in the world who do not like the idea that their game could ever go mainstream. And these people hate Anita Sarkeesian. So all these off-topic reviews in the last couple of months about Slay the Spire, all of them contain just brutal, off-topic, irrelevant reviews. And these reviews are not about the game. They're not about the experience of playing the game. They're not about the design space or what they hope to be included in the design space. They're not about the future of the game and what they hope to see included or excluded in the future. They're just about this one woman. So Anita Sarkeesian is listed as a credited consultant in the Slay the Spire 2 credits, and all of these negative reviews are explicitly just because this credit is in there. Who is Anita Sarkeesian? She consults on character design. She offers a consultancy service for accessibility in video games. This means that she reviews and she provides notes about character designs and highlights if character designs could be offensive. She highlights different ways that people play games and reviews accessibility features for games. And in consulting with somebody like Anita Sarkeesian, what you're doing is you're saying, hey, we would like our game to not be offensive to people. We would like to include as many market demographics as we can in our game without insulting people. We would like to make our game as accessible as possible to ensure that it is playable by the largest audience possible. And does that sound reasonable to you? And what is Anita Sarkeesian's particular special interest? Well, her particular special interest is in critiquing the use of women as marketing props in video games. She started with a series called Tropes vs. Women that was released onto YouTube in like 2013. I watched it at the time. I vividly remember seeing Tropes vs. Women come up in my subscription feed, released 3 hours ago in the afternoon. I watched them as they were released. They're totally fine. She doesn't say anything radical. She doesn't say anything insane. She doesn't say anything that would get it demonetized or banned. There's literally no offensive content in here whatsoever. What the series is about is explaining a trope, as in a literary device that is commonly used, and then she explains tropes that are exclusive to women in video games, and then provides examples of these tropes about women being used in video games and video game marketing. And what were the tropes that she was kind of discussing or giving examples of that were, common during the 90s and the 2000s? Well, this kind of stuff like, Chainsaw Lollipop, about overly sexualized, unformed characters used almost exclusively for marketing material. And Anita's work is quite specifically about criticizing the use of vapid tropes against women, or that are dehumanizing to women in marketing material, in the promotion of games, or in trying to make a game appeal to a specific kind of fantasy. And this is marketing 101. This is marketing 101. It's the reason that her ideas have taken off. A lot of people don't know this, but over 80% of all consumer spending around the world is done by women. And yet video game consumer spending is 3/5 by men, 60% by men. And just think about this for a moment, right? When a shareholder or a corporate executive or a market analyst sees that there is a 65 to 75 percentage point swing away from the norm towards a specific demographic in a consumer industry, they look at this with drool down their chin, right? Because what they're seeing is not a market that's dominated by one particular type of consumer. They're seeing a market that is underrepresented by women. And they're going to go out of their way to say, hey, this is well behind the curve. We have a gap in the market here to create a product that will be consumed by 85% women and make a huge amount of money. And just think for a moment, if you saw a stock on the stock market that by all accounts was performing 65% worse than it should, or if you saw a house on the housing market that was comparable to other properties in the area, but its price was 65 percentage points lower than their price. Like, it's not rocket science, people. Every indication in the market says that women should be buying significantly more video games and should be spending significantly more on video games. And Anita Sarkeesian's series and her criticism here in Tropes versus Women is just one of many explanatory variables outlining why there is a huge gap between two very basic demographics, male, female, consumption in a media space, in video games. Again, video games are just an aesthetic domain. They're just a different kind of industry and different kind of consumer product. Movies, books, art, interactive art, tickets sold for botanical gardens, tickets sold for artistic displays, sculptures sold for gardens. 80% of the consumption comes from women. And yet video games doesn't. And it's not because video games are special in any unique way. They're just a media type like any other. And Anita Sarkeesian's criticisms are just one of the many, many reasons that is the case. But for these off-topic reviewers, just the fact that her name is in the credits is enough for them to review bomb the game. And continuously review bomb the game as well. As soon as they found out, even if they are enjoying the game, they go back and review bomb the game. Just to maybe give you a sense for when you should consider one person's involvement enough to define the criticism of a game. That person's called an auteur. I've referred to Casey and Anthony as an auteur a number of times in this video. An auteur is when the author function is dominated by the media representation of one particular person. They become an elevated kind of personnel. Here is just a short list of people that I consider to be auteurs. Akira Toriyama, Florence Welch, Todd Howard and Mark Rosewater, Vlaada Chvátil, Ado, Naoko, Yoshihiro Togashi, Hayao Miyazaki, Joji, Filthy Frank, Ikura from Yasobi. And I mean no offense to like Anita Sarkeesian or anyone who likes Anita Sarkeesian or any of the work she's ever done. I cannot imagine a media product where Anita Sarkeesian is presented as an auteur, where her involvement in the art is enough to define the entire discourse, style, and author function of the work. Like, she's not on anyone's list as like an auteur. She is here on this list as a scapegoat, right? So these people are brigading, they're attempting to manufacture consensus by review bombing all at the same time. They're trying to create noise about Anita Sarkeesian's involvement. The actual work, the game itself, is completely ignored. They want the game to be deplatformed by review bombing it and lowering its metascore and making sure it won't be seen. They're responding with complaints like, oh, it's about protecting the consumer was betrayed by this person's involvement. Completely empty consumerism. No one has ever looked at the credits of Lord of the Rings and said, that's a wokey. No one has ever looked through the credits of The Witcher 3 and found, the 24 wokies that worked on the game and said, oh yeah, they were enough to ruin the game. They are using Anita Sarkeesian as a scapegoat to exit their participation from the early access, and as a scapegoat, as a reason, as an excuse to put down the game. Why do they do this? I'll be real, because they suck at the game. All these complaints about how the game is too hard, all these complaints about how, their tools are being taken away from them, I can't play the way I want to play. Those people are honest. They are review bombing the game because they don't like the power fantasy being taken away from them, and they are deciding to leave a negative review and stop playing the game. For these other toxic gamers who refuse to accept that they can just suck at the game, they need an excuse. And when they see Anita Sarkeesian in the credits, they latch on. That's my excuse to review bomb the game. It's okay to suck. Like, it's totally okay to be bad at the game. I'm bad at most games. It doesn't ruin my enjoyment of them. You don't need to blame an irrelevant critic to quit the game. And the reason I know it is this way is because They do it over and over and over and over. Another wokey SJW punish, boys. Good job. Every time there is a game that is marginally difficult, that ruins their ego because they can't just power fantasy their way through it, they find a reason to call it woke, and then they review bomb and quit the game that way. They could have just stopped. They could have just hidden it from their Steam list, but that's not enough, right? They need a reason to give to the rest of their friends. Oh, why aren't you playing Slay the Spire 2? Oh, have you reached Ascension 10? Oh, what's your longest run streak? Oh, actually, I don't play Slay the Spire 2. It's woke. These people are trapped in a culture war. Everything that exists is viewed in relation to their ideology. They view wokeism as a contaminant, a kind of like Phyrexian e-core. If it touches literally anything in the world, it's enough for them to use it as a scapegoat to exit, the discourse. And they have this mythical, invisible, all-powerful opponent who controls the very zeitgeist. This is a really, really common theme for these people. They think that there is a grand conspiracy to alter video games in such a way that hurts them individually as like a toxic competitive player. And this is despite being completely unable to recognize the woke influence in the game without Anita Sarkeesian's credit in there, right? This is why this review bomb is happening now rather than when the game came out. To see the credits for Slay the Spire, you need to play the game and have an interest in it. And they couldn't see any wokeism in the game until somebody pointed out for them. And now they're all learning about it over the course of like a month that, it's been tainted. Here's your best example, right? Asmongold. Asmongold played Slay the Spire 2, regular thumbnail of his, everyone's playing this game, ... Here's what he had to say. I'm really impressed. This is a tremendous game. 9 out of 10. You know what? And credit to Asmongold, he gave Slay the Spire 2 a 9 out of 10, despite being garbage at the game, despite not reading most of the cards. Asmongold at least recognizes when he's bad at the game and has played enough games that he can objectively say, yes, this is good. I'm not reading the cards. I'm not understanding what's going on, but it is gripping and I'm going to give this 9 out of 10. And then, a couple of months later, when he came back around to the controversy with Anita Sarkeesian, here's what he had to say about it. The point is that she's involved. Always freak out, always melt down, always overreact. Scorched earth. No quarter, no mercy. From his perspective, it doesn't matter that he gave the game a 9 out of 10. It doesn't matter that he thought the game was good despite him being bad at it. It doesn't matter that he couldn't recognize any woke influence in the game before the credit came through. It doesn't matter to him that he didn't even know about the controversy until his chat was spamming it and dragged him into seeing it. And in this video, you can see him go through the reviews and try and look for a negative review that's actually a negative review about the game, or trying to look for a review that's actually explaining what the woke influence is revealing about the game. And he has this discussion with his chat where he's asking them what happened in the game. Oh yeah, it's so bad. What happened? What did they do? And they can't give him an answer either, which is why he results in this scorched earth approach. Oh, I can't find what's wrong with the game. I think it's a really good game. But the point is that she's involved. That's why he comes to that conclusion, because she only serves to be a scapegoat. At the end of the day, their ideology is segregationism. These people, these segregationists, abuse, especially online and fractured third places, to claim ownership and to claim dominance of the author function and all the supporting spaces around the author function to create a facade of cultural ownership. It is not enough for toxic gamergators that there are people in the game who associate gaming with Cookie Crush, or that there are people in the world who associate gaming with Celeste, or that there are people in the world who associate gaming with Horizon Zero Dawn. To them, when somebody in the world thinks about gaming, they need to think about a seedy, unwashed, white teenager in the year 2008 on their couch in the rumpus room of their parents' middle-class home where they're yelling at the other kids with slurs over voice chat. That is the world in which they exist. And these toxic segregationists believe in this myth of cultural ownership of gaming and gaming-adjacent activity. Do Italians own sculpting? Do Venetians own glass? Do the Chinese own papyrus? No, these are ridiculous questions. And yet, American millennial white boys think that they own the aesthetic realm of games, of interactive digital media. They believe that gaming exists as an escapist consumer product and a reprieve from life. That sucks for you. right? That says a lot more about you than it does about the aesthetic domain. They're predominantly passive consumers that assign blame for current affairs and blame for their own life and all the maladies that surround them primarily to other people. It's all part of a big conspiracy. The woke is ruining my games. And from their perspective, when any other people intrude, quote unquote, on their culture, quote unquote, by representing an outgroup to them or outgroup ideals, or just controlling an author function in the way that the author function is intended without letting them have dominance of it, they act as this defensive public that they have to burn it all down. And this is why they can't handle modern gaming, because modern gaming often revolves around these early access, almost live service experiences. They want to exist in third places that they are nostalgic for, like the voice chats of old Call of Duty, or like the Baron's chat on old World of Warcraft. I was there. I played World of Warcraft before I ever got a Facebook account. I know exactly what this feeling is like. But even though they want to participate in this kind of early access, live service, community-driven author function and be culturally relevant, they can't, because that would involve having a third space. Open and inviting? No, they explicitly don't want other people to be there, and they're not shy about letting you know. Comfortable and informal? No. You need to have an appropriate gamer score, achievement points, or MMR. Convenient? No, you need to constantly prove yourself. Unpretentious? No, you need to own this amount of gear and be a true gamer in their eyes. There are regulars? No, they think that if people are on the forums chatting, it's because they're losers who aren't playing. They want you to be playing instead. Conversational? No. They actively don't want to participate in conversation. If you ever posted on the WoW local area chat for help, just with a question, they will tell you go Google it, right? They aren't interested in participating in conversation, even about the game itself. They're there to prove it to themselves and to everyone around them that they know heaps about the game. Even though answering the question would prove that you know something about the game, they still don't want it to be conversational. And lighthearted, no. Absolutely not. There's nothing in the Gamergate mentality that just says you can just enjoy the game. They say they just want to enjoy the game, but it's actually impossible for them to just enjoy the game. Everything is politicized. Everything is a culture war to them. So since these segregationist ideals and behaviors are inherently contradictory to third places, they are policed out. They cannot be there, so they are forced out. Online, this looks like banning and blocking and anti-brigading techniques. It's shared ban lists between streamers and on servers. If you get banned from, Jorbs' chat, you're probably also going to get banned from Baylor's chat, and you're going to get banned from a bunch of other chats as well. That's the way it works, and that's the way it should work. Due to fracturing across the platforms, like across Reddit and across Discord and across the streams, it's necessary to police all these platforms, and the moderators do a great job, and we should all support the moderators in doing this job. And one of the ways that moderators can do this job is by sharing those bans across platforms as well. Slay the Spire 2 includes these other co-op modes, it has the digital canvas and the writing on the map. Many players use companion voice chat or text chat in Steam or in Discord as well. And guess what the Gamergaters complain about these days now that there's voice transcripting AI? They complain that they're going to be automatically banned in voice chat. That's the way it should work. And when these segregationists can't maintain control of these public domains like third spaces, or can't maintain control of these culturally significant fronts that they want to fight on, like whether a game is woke or not, or whether a game is successful or not, or what the general public or pop culture thinks about when they say gamer, they have a number of techniques to try and invalidate it, right? So they use direct exclusion, harassment, doxing, slurs, threats, brigading. They use exclusionary enclaves like guilds that are just anti-woke based guilds, forums that'll have whitelists or invitation only, or these curated reviews. You can find on Steam these curated groups where they explicitly go out of their way to say, we will only list games on this curated group that are compliant with Gamergate ideology. Targeted griefing, using in-game mechanics to bully or gank people. They'll go out of their way to find somebody who they want to bully out of the game and make their experience as bad as possible and try and force them to switch server, right? Essentially direct exclusion through the in-game mechanics. And they'll try and cleanse the canon as well, right? They'll try and use fanfic or fan art to contest the author function. They'll argue to the cows come home with the authors about what's happening in the story. And often, they'll use the fact that retcons exist, or they use the fact that there are gaps in the plot to use this as justification. Oh, the story doesn't make any sense anyway, so they're just shoehorning in woke stuff, but here's all the reasons why this doesn't make any sense. When Sylvanas burned down Teldrassil in World of Warcraft, you didn't hear the end of it. That's why they all left, right? And that's why we've all had to deal with this pile of WoW refugees locusting every other game since then. So why are they so mad? Well, at risk of giving too much credit, let's just go through each of the complaints or each of the reasons that I've been able to identify one by one and just explain why it's stupid. It's mainstream now. I don't like the fact that my game is mainstream. All elements of digital culture are mainstream. I'm sorry. If you enjoyed AOL back in the day, that's mainstream. If you enjoyed ASCII art, it's gone. If you enjoyed playing chess with a friend over email, that's gone. All digital culture is mainstream. We all deal with it. You are not unique. But there's corporate style guides. We were able to find a style guide back in 2007 that's ruined all the design since then. They are the legal right holders. You don't own the game. They own the game. They have fiduciary responsibilities to their shareholders. One of those fiduciary responsibilities is making the game appeal to broader audiences. As mentioned, they see a huge gap between male and female consumption of video games, which is a huge opportunity to appeal to a market that spends a lot more for the same level of consumption. That is their fiduciary responsibility, and they are the legal rights holders. That is their job. If you don't like the fact that corporations are taking media and trying to make more money off of them, try and get into non-corporate media. Just make a good game, they say. Well, here we are, Slay the Spire 2. You couldn't even tell Slay the Spire 2 had woke in it, and you still can't, and yet you're review bombing it. So this is insincere as well. Well, journalists lied about us. Almost every article ever written is incorrect or an agenda or marketing. Journalists lie about everything. You cannot watch the news without knowing which organization or which body or which media group owns news media to understand their agenda. There is a cottage industry baked around trying to get through journalistic agenda. I cannot stress this enough. If you think that journalists lying about gamers is a big deal, I encourage you to learn about literally any other group in society and what the news has written about them. The only people who have ever been favorably interpreted by the news are landlords, because all the news organizations own real estate aggregator sites and have huge sums of investable cash, probably tied up in other financial vehicles, also tied up in property development. I guarantee you, there is no one in society who has not been lied about and shamed by journalists except for landlords and property developers. Well, they politicize everything. Every game is political. Sometimes writing can just be bad. Sometimes a writer wants to make a point and they're not good enough at writing to make it subtextual or to make it analogous. And you can see the text that they're presenting to you. You can recognize the politicization. I guarantee you that there is a lot of political content out there that you don't recognize as political because it's well written. Also, if you can't recognize how Halo or Call of Duty are political, then you are the sausage. You got minced. You are here in the casing. It's too expensive. Look around you. Everything is expensive. Everyone is suffering from everything being expensive. Movies, books. The only thing that's not expensive is free-to-play apps, and they're advertising to you when you're collecting your data, which is also expensive in some other different kind of way. It's just an externality. If you want video games to be less expensive, how about you stop criticizing games for not having everything? Let the authors have their authorial vision, and rather than criticizing, this doesn't have any player housing, I want a PvP mechanic, why doesn't this have a crafting system? Take out this character, I want to mod out this character, we need workshop support. I'm sorry, but it's all the features that make these games expensive. Stop complaining that games don't have features, and let the authors design the game they want to design, and they'll be less expensive. Slay the Spire 2 is $35. It's a cheap game even by 2018 standards when it was released. And it's actually a cheap game for 2010 standards. StarCraft 2 was a $60 game. Skyrim was a $60 game. Slay the Spire 2, I'll say it, it's better than StarCraft and Skyrim. It is a better game. Probably more effort has been put into it. But we're the original audience. No, your parents were the original audience. You got marketed to ask your parents to buy you this thing, just the same way that you got marketed to ask your parents to buy you a guitar, or to ask your parents to buy you a dirt bike, or to ask your parents to buy you a surfboard, or any other marketing that happens to children. You know why you don't see those advertisements anymore about how you can be a cool dude, you know, rocking around the post-apocalyptic world, killing baddies and collecting babes? Because you're not allowed to advertise to children anymore. And when you were being advertised to, you were a child. Your parents were the audience for the marketers, and your job was to harass them to buy you that game. That's why you saw these advertisements. That's why these advertisements ever exist. But they're invading our spaces. No, they are public third spaces. Digital or otherwise, you do not own third spaces. You are a segregationist, so you can't understand this, but you are not the center of the world. And other people sharing public spaces is A, none of your business, and B, if you have a problem with it, stay home. Well, they don't take it seriously. Again, games are a field of aesthetics. If you want to compete, compete. If you want to choose a game that has a strong competitive edge and MMO ratings and ELO ratings and matchmaking, go do those. Dota is there for you. League of Legends is there for you. Age of Empires is there for you. StarCraft is there for you. Rocket League is there for you. There is no shortage of games that support competitive play. You know what competitive play is not? Competitive play is not within the scope of the general public's understanding of these games, you know? No one looks at a book and says, oh, I can see how this book would do well in a literature competition. No one sensible sees a couple of kids kicking the 40 and thinks, oh, well, you know, Glenn Archer can kick further than that kid. Dustin Martin could outrun that kid any day of the week. Oh, they're not as good as Buddy Franklin. That's a ridiculous notion. The general public does not consider like aesthetic domains from the perspective of competitive players, and your review about the competitive space of the game is really specific to that. So if you want people to take the game seriously, and you only want to be around people who take the game seriously, you have to go find that specifically. It's not general public. It's not within the general public because it's not a third space. Being good at the game and requiring other people to be good at the game before they can participate in it, that is pretension, right? You're imposing that requirement on other people just to be there. Well, I can't be myself. Yeah, but you're toxic. Other people also can't be themselves around you. That's a you problem, not an anyone else problem. And they're casualizing games. Well, be a better patron and get better art. Fans support their hobby. Otaku support their hobbies. Idol fans with their oshi support their hobbies. You know what gamergators do? They pirate everything. Why, in an industry driven by shareholders and stakeholders and revenues and return on investment, why should anyone care about the opinion of a non-paying player? You are worse than somebody who just doesn't even know your product exists because you know the product exists and chose to pirate it instead of being a paying customer. If you want to participate in the arts and have art represent you, you need to be a better patron. Another one they say is that they feel unwelcome. That's up to you. If you feel unwelcome in public, especially in a safe and open public where there's no protection and no requirements, you probably just aren't meeting the minimums. You know, if you feel disgusting going outside, maybe start by taking a shower. It's up to you whether or not you feel welcome or not in a third space that's meeting the requirements of a third space. That just is how the public works. But they're erasing my identity, my identity as a gamer. We're all demographics. All of us are being affected by that. You're not unique. It's not a grievance that's unique to you, and there's not a grievance that you can blame somebody else for. You know, do I hate the fact that glitch music has been overtaken by like rap glitch and now Katy Perry's doing it? Yeah, I hate that. Do I feel like my identity as like a tech and glitch enjoyer is gone? No. Because I still enjoy the things that I enjoy, like other people using other musical techniques borrowed from the domain that I enjoy is just new art, and I just won't participate in it. It's totally fine to just not participate. But I suffered for gaming, and they were raising that. Mate, high school is over. That's really all I have to say for that. But I game to escape women. Well, sure, no one wants to feel judged. Guess what, though? Masculinity isn't special in feeling judged. You know, judging everyone else's sexuality or judging everyone else's identity as a response to feeling judged isn't real. That's literally in your head. If you were more secure in your sense of masculinity, you wouldn't feel judged all the time just by being around women. Well, they hate me. Well, A, you relish antisocial conflict yourself. So, for starters, you probably hate people too. You don't have to be on X, you don't have to be on Twitter, you don't have to see the toxic people there in their domains as well. You can just exit all those domains. Thirdly, this is the general public we're talking about. This is the law of large numbers. You don't see all the people who have been banned that don't share your views in these third spaces. Anyone who's ever said this game's not for white men, unless they're literally the author promoting this game, trying to exclude you, any notion that you have in your head about these creators hating you is conspiratorial. You're projecting these views onto them because you're not seeing segregationist ideals in a game. You know, and this is a matter of sensitivity. If you can see woke in everything, but the game is woke and inclusive for everything except you, perhaps you just don't understand what representation looks like for yourself. And again, if you had a more secure sense of masculinity, you probably would recognize when masculinity is being correctly represented in video games. Not even like correctly represented, just presented with any amount of nuance. Just because every other person's identity and just because every other type of culture is novel to you because it's new and you can't recognize your own navel doesn't mean that they hate you. It just means that you have no idea what anyone else in the world is about. That's what that means. It means that you don't know anyone. It means that you don't have any idea what anyone else is doing. Participate in other people's cultures more rather than just assuming that because you can recognize another culture or you can recognize something is different, it's therefore antagonistic to you. Well, they're ruining the art that I value. You can pick up a pen. There is nothing stopping you from creating your own fan art, from creating your own animations, from creating your own media, your own character designs, your own games. If you weren't a passive consumer who expected arrogantly and presumptuously that games were just going to be made for you, without even often like your own fiscal participation, like in patronage of these arts, there would be more of it. You too can participate in the artistic process by picking up a pen yourself. You can learn to code and just make the game that you want to play. That's what Local Thunk did. Local Thunk made the game that he wanted to play. And guess what? Balatro is awesome. And I hate being preached at. Well, you can ignore that. You know, play the game on a different language or a different audio track. You know, basically the only time I hear music with like English lyrics are in shopping centers and on someone's stream where they're playing like English language music. Because it's cringe to me. I feel embarrassed for singers singing in English and singing about like their relationships and their goals and things like that. I cringe at that. So I don't listen to English language music. You too can just recognize in yourself what you want to consume and find the media to consume of that type. Review the things that you want to review and enjoy the things that you want to enjoy. And if something isn't for you, you can just put it down. And this is the heart of the matter. There are three big things that stand out for Gamergaters that they will literally never let go. Gaming is my achievement, the women I like are digital, and I'm powerless outside. Now they would never say it like this. Gaming is my achievement. Well, here's the first thing. Validating your sense of self-worth through external achievements is never a good idea. It doesn't matter what it is, it's never a good idea. You could be an Olympian, you could be the fastest runner in the world. Do you think Usain Bolt determines his entire sense of self-worth around the fact that he's the fastest runner? Or do you think he also values all the training he did, all the relationships he managed along the way, all the work that he's done as a leader and as a role model and as a mentor, all the work that he's done around the world to promote exercise and to promote healthy living as an inspiration? What's going to happen when the world record gets broken again and all of a sudden a person's entire ego is wound up in that notion? Well, this is what the gamers have gone through. Gaming is my achievement. I didn't participate well in high school. I don't have good relationships with my family. I haven't started my career. I haven't started my education. I don't like participating, and gaming is my achievement. It's the way I soothe my ego. It's just straight up a bad idea. And defending your version of gaming culture from the reality that it is an aesthetic domain, it is something that is highly profitable, and mainstream culture is taking control of it, that won't magically make your sense of gaming culture valid. Shadowboxing with ghosts can't replace a sense of self-worth. There is nothing you can do to try and defend an ethereal, magical, transient, apparition-like sense of a culture that doesn't exist and hasn't existed for a very, very long time to replace your sense of self-worth there, you know? You have to find that elsewhere. Gaming is mainstream now, and there is no way that the gaming audience is ever going to validate you again. If you are good enough at the game, that you can become a hyper-competitive player, or that you can become a top speedrunner, and you can stream that, people will tell you that they like your streaming goals. People will tell you that they like your runs, that they like your playstyle. They'll pog for your sick plays. But no one in the general public is ever going to acknowledge that. Well, the women I like are digital. And this is something they'll never admit to, the fact that so many gamer gators exist in a waifu space, like a waifu sphere. Waifus are an idea, and the developer is not the entire author function for a waifu, like Aloy, Cortana, all of your Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter characters, Lara Croft. Something really interesting that's happened with this demographic of gamers that were born between 1990 and 95, especially if they were in the marketing demographic for these kind of games. Something that's really interesting happened is that they have seen graphical fidelity improve of their games with these female characters. And I don't think that they recognize that they have waifus, in every sense of the word. And a lot of the a lot of the disdain that they have is this expectation that over the years and over various iterations of their games, with more and more graphical fidelity and more big budgets or things like that, their waifu characters would just get more and more like their ideal, which is not how it happens. Obviously, because as a game gets sequels, it gets sequels because it's expanding into a broader and broader market and wants to access more of a market. It's also why we have reboots, right? Marketers recognize that if they put out a sixth sequel to a game and they put a 6 on it, no one's going to want to buy it because they're going to think it's for people who played the other 5. So they rework the game and the game title and they relaunch it again. And guess what they get to do when they relaunch a game and they're going to go for a bigger market audience? They get to improve the representation of the game so that it is less offensive to the audience that they want to target. And again, what audience do they want to target? They want to target women. Why? Because women in every other scope of consumer spending spends more than men. Video games does not represent this. It's not representative of the fact that video games are special. Again, it's representative of the fact that there's a gap in the market for video games that appeal to women to make a huge amount of money. So that's why they do it. So the changes to these characters in living media are expected. It's within the artistic vision of the developers and the copyright holders of the game. Their artistic visions change, their target demographics change. And guess what? It doesn't matter if the character designer or the developer from the original version of the game comes out and says, oh, I don't like what they did with this character. I never designed it that way. My intention was this. Well, guess what, buddy? You're not the copyright holder. You know, the game is the title, is the brand. Being the head developer of a game doesn't make you the auteur. Being the face of the game, being the brand of the game makes you the auteur. Slay the Spire 2 is an indie game led by Casey and Anthony. The vast majority of returning players recognize Casey and Anthony as the developers of the game, just like the majority of Balatro players have heard of Local Thunk, and the majority of Stardew Valley players recognize Concerned Ape. If somebody has to tell you that they're the developer of the original game and their opinion is that the current developers are wrong, they are outside of author function. They are just baiting you into algorithmic appeal. Their opinion on art does not matter. I'm sorry, but that's the truth of the matter. The organization, the brand, the publisher, the developer, they own the copyright, they own the canon, they own the distribution, they own the representation. They can determine what all of these spaces are. Just like it doesn't matter that Anita Sarkeesian is a credit on the back end of Slay the Spire 2 as a consultant, it doesn't matter that 4 iterations of a game ago, the lead designer who worked on the different technology, the different characters, the different storyline, the different artistic vision, doesn't like a current version of the game. Oh, actually, it was it was at the time intended that these were hotties in the Prince of Persia because there's a prince who's meant to have a harem. Okay. Well, the current interpretation is that we would like to sell more copies. So if the average female player thinks that she's stepped into a harem and doesn't feel comfortable with that, we're probably going to take that out. And let's be flat. The inability to accept that characters can change over time, especially female characters can change over time, it's unhealthy. I know said over and over and over again, oh, they just attack your manhood or they just hate men. It is strictly a sign of unhealthy, badly adaptive, fragile masculinity if you cannot accept that other people change around you, or that you are so withdrawn from the idea that a woman could judge you as a man that you can only spend time around digital women. Right? That's like otaku, closeted, hikikomori level of dysfunction. The gamergators are this. That's the world that they live in. And nothing about the media landscape and nothing about the world is going to change that. Then that change needs to come from within. But I'm powerless outside. Well, guess what, buddy? Very few people aren't. Very few people in the world can go outside and have authority. Usually they have to wear a uniform to have it. And even then, a lot of the time they don't. Responsibility in the real world comes with a duty of care. Straight up, you cannot participate in society if you can't put aside antisocial, reactionary, defensive shame and prioritize the need of the collective. The public space is a third space. If you can't leave segregationist ideals at home when you go outside into the world, you will never have any responsibility, because the first step of any responsibility in any world ever, be it handling someone else's money, being it cooking for somebody, being it a team leader, being it a first responder, even something as so simple as driving a bus. If you cannot leave those segregationist ideals at home, you cannot be trusted with that job. Because in the public sphere, maintenance of the third space is paramount. And when you wander around in public explicitly to make other people unwelcome, that is antisocial behavior. Explicitly to make other people uncomfortable, that is antisocial behavior. And so again, it's up to you. Rather than having this long list of conspiracies about how everyone in the world is against you in every single way, put it in your head instead. I've never met any of these people. They do not know who I am. And when I'm applying for this job and they look up my social media, what are they going to find? Social media is a public space. The internet is a public space. If you can't separate yourself from these ideals and participate in public like a sensible person defending the greater good of the third space, no one will ever let you participate there. It's the same reason you get banned from chat rooms and forums and discords and voice calls. And the answer is not to reformat society so that you are welcome, because then everyone else would be excluded. And if you're thinking to yourself, well, their opinions don't matter, that's the point. That's the idea in your head that you need to discard. Other people are humans as well, and probably more actualized and more human and closer to God than you are. And so the common response to this is Popper's paradox, right? Tolerance of the intolerance. Get a load of the peaceful, tolerant left, they say. Let's read the quote. So this is Karl Popper and Open Society and its Enemies. Unlimited tolerance must lead to the disappearance of tolerance. If we extend unlimited tolerance even to those who are intolerant, if we are not prepared to defend a tolerant society against the onslaught of the intolerant, then the tolerant will be destroyed and the tolerance with them. In this formulation, I do not imply, for instance, that we should always suppress the utterance of intolerant philosophies. As long as we can counter them by rational argument and keep them in check by public opinion, suppression would certainly be unwise. But we should claim the right to suppress them if necessary, even by force, for it may easily turn out that they are not prepared to meet us on the level of rational argument, but begin by denouncing all argument. They may forbid their followers to listen to rational argument because it is deceptive, and teach them to answer arguments by the use of their fists or pistols. We should therefore claim, in the name of tolerance, the right not to tolerate the intolerant. So this is exactly the opposite of what they say Popper's paradox is, right? Oh my lord, the intolerant left, look at them, they're not tolerant of my ideas. If your ideas were rational, we could discuss them. If you could review the media as media, we could discuss it. If you could review the experience as experience, we could discuss it. If you could review the authorial intent as the authorial intent, we could discuss it. But when you are trying to use economic weapons, exclusionary tactics and redlining, and the threat of actualizing force, like threats and doxing against people, you are not a rational actor. And you deserve, in every single way, to be suppressed. That is Popper's paradox. Popper's paradox doesn't mean that we are intolerant of difference of opinion. Popper's paradox means that you should have force used against you if you are not a rational actor. And gamergators, by and large, are not rational actors. So with all that said, with all that in mind, let's look at one of these things, right? So this person left a review, 36 hours at times of review, and they've played for another 21 hours since. So they didn't put the game down. The public sphere has been against removing the artist from the art, so I guess I shouldn't either. With Anita being a consultant on the game, I cannot in good faith recommend it to others. I won't be able to refund it, and I enjoy the gameplay, but the fact that Gamergate Anita is part of the game means that I cannot expect the game to cater to the players anymore. A shame. Now, with everything I've just kind of said, we can construct this fairly obvious, so let's go through it together. The public sphere has been against removing the artist from the art, so I guess I shouldn't either. What they're saying is that I'm part of an in-group, and I'm being peer pressured or going along with my in-group peer pressure. The public sphere has been against removing the artist from the art. So they are attributing this to other people. They're saying, I'm not the actor here. I'm not the active here. I'm just passive. I'm just being dragged along. With Anita being a consultant on the game, I cannot in good faith recommend it to others. So Anita's involvement, Sarkeesian's involvement, is enough to taint this game, and now this person can no longer recommend it. So that is enough for them. That is a 1. It's a 1 or a 0. It's a Boolean decision. Their entire review is based on one person's credit. I won't be able to refund it. So they're saying that if they could refund it, they would. So they want to economically hurt the developers of this game for the involvement of one credit. And I enjoy the gameplay. So they're saying that their review isn't even of the game. They're acknowledging that their obsession with Anita and their entire decision being around Sarkeesian is adverse to the review of the actual game, which they say that they enjoy. But the fact that Gamergate Anita is part of the game, this is a really deep one. Gamergate Anita is part of the game. They're saying that they consider Anita Sarkeesian to be important enough to be part of the author function, right? So she's up there with the level of Casey and Anthony and Mega Chris as a brand. She's up there with Quentin Tarantino. She's up there with Akira Toriyama, right? So he's saying that Anita is an auteur. Her involvement is incredibly important in any product. She's elevating a consultant to a level above the brand. The fact that Gamergate Anita, they're also calling her Gamergate Anita, which is not true. This is revisionism. Tropes versus Women started in 2013. The Gamergate thing started in 2014. It wasn't even named such until 2015. There was a long time between Gamergate starting and being radicalized and Tropes versus Women starting, over a year. And that entire time, Anita Sarkeesian had fine reviews if, you know, the regular hate threats and things like death threats and hate and things like that, right? So, but by trying to say that Anita here is part of Gamergate, that's revisionism. These people hated Anita Sarkeesian long before Gamergate. I cannot expect the game to cater to the players anymore. A shame. They had the expectation that the game would cater to the players. They consider themselves to be one of the players, and yet they are unwilling, explicitly unwilling, to participate in a good faith review of the game. So they're explicitly saying, I consider myself to be one of the players, but I want to harm the company economically. I refuse to acknowledge the authority of the authors or the brand, and my expectation that I am being catered to is betrayed. Could you ever expect the game to cater to you? Like, do you think that your version of a game and the authorial vision ever actually aligned? Who do you think are the players? The players is the audience that's participating in the author function at this point in time. The Discord, the Reddit, the streams. Would you be banned from these places? In which case, yes, you are not a player. If you would be banned from the Discord or the Reddit, you are not a member of the community. Straight up. Down the line, The players will be the general audience. And are you a member of the general audience? Insofar as you're a demographic spec? Yes. And what do you even think the game is, right? The game is up to the brand and the author, and you're elevating Anita Sarkeesian's involvement above their importance. So you don't actually agree with what the game is. And again, what did you expect this game to cater to you? You had no reason to expect the game to cater to you, especially if you think that one woke actor is more important than the authors. The authors are the ones that are determining what the game is. So your expectation that the game is going to cater to you is entirely in your own head. There is no way, there's literally logically no way that you could ever have been catered to by the game, and your expectation that you would be catered to is presumption and arrogance and, entitlement. That's what that means, entitlement. And we ask the question, as always with these people, do they even know what they want? This is why the WoW team said you don't know what you want, because you don't know what you want. You have downvoted this game even if you would recommend it. You've played 20 more hours than your downvote. You say you wouldn't recommend it when you're playing it yourself and are saying it's a good game. This is why you get taken over by people like Milo Yiannopoulos, right? In 2014 and 2015, Breitbart Media and Steve Bannon, who led the Trump campaign, went out of their way to insert somebody who's appealing to gamers, to act as a vanguard and act as like a firebrand and a rallier for them to circle around to weaponize this disenfranchised, isolated group of No, you're arrogant populist reactionaries, and you got taken over by somebody who wanted to treat you like useful idiots, and now, 12 years later, you are still useful idiots. All it ever took to take control of the entire Gamergate movement and morph it into this online Trump meme movement, which has gone all the way down the line now to top-down executive orders against DEI, to like the Trump administration banning any immigrants from places that they don't like, and forming a secret police to like detain people and export them against their own constitutional law as well as international law, as well as against like human rights concerns, with conditions that journalists can never see, with reports that we do hear of severe cases of abuse, including of children. And you're still living in this world where you're the victim because the developers of God of War want to expand their market to like Greek fable girlies. Do you see how that's a parody? Do you see how that's a parody of thought, of rationalism? Gamergators are such a dysfunctional, victimized, arrogant, entitled, navel-gazing, ununderstanding segregationist with such a weak sense of identity. NEETs with such a weak sense of masculine identity, a weak sense of social identity, a weak sense of moral identity, that you can send in an obvious, on his face, telling you to your face plant that I will lead the movement that you belong to and be your Pied Piper, to rally video game discourse as a kind of culture war, to propagate that culture war to every single aspect of every single person's life, even if they're not American, to elect Trump. They did this to themselves, and they did this instead of admitting that they had a weak sense of self and that they had a shameful sense of their masculinity. It can't be helped. It literally just can't be helped. And this is why the only solution is to ban them from every single front, and why no other media source that can ban them from every single front, like Steam and like removing their off-topic reviews, they literally will never have any power ever again. And if that sounded scathing, and if that sounded way too harsh, when I said I was going to be in good faith, let's look at an example. One more example. This reviewer said, "Okay, but the involvement of a so-called game consultant is unacceptable and unnecessary. Needless to say, supporters of this studio feel deeply disappointed and betrayed." 1.9 hours on review, product refunded. Bro really got in like a silent run before refunding. That's incredibly funny. Supporters of the studio, not a member of the player base. Other people are saying this. Appeal to other people. Oh, everyone's talking about this. The supporters of the studio. The studio is Casey and Anthony. It's two auteurs. The studio is the author. We know who we're supporting. You claiming that supporters of the studio feel deeply disappointed and betrayed is nonsense. You don't know what you're talking about, and you don't represent anyone. No one promised you anything. Literally, who are you? This person, when I had a look, had 57 other reviews. Almost all of them were negative. Almost all the negative reviews they had were less than 1 hour and were refunded. So they're an active participant. They're an active participant in this like hostile review bombing, even buying the game to legitimize their review before refunding to make it seem as bad as possible. They have over a dozen reviews around DRM and anti-cheat. So they're a game pirater. They're not a patron of the medium. They have over a dozen reviews about microtransactions. Again, so you want to play live service games for free? Sorry. You can't expect people to make a product for you for free. Again, you're not a patron. Like, if you want yourself to be represented in a marketplace, you need to put up your money. And no amount of, oh, I'm protecting the consumer matters here. Other people are putting up their money and getting the art that they want. And if you want that, guess what? It's an auction. There's a finite number of game developer studios. There's a finite number of people willing to make art. If you made the art that you want to see and market it to your in-group, none of them would pay you for it, which is why none of you have a game that you like. At the end of the day, the fact that you're entitled and more willing to pirate games that you want to play than pay for them is the reason you have no games that you like. It's the reason the industry is looking for other markets. They have over a dozen reviews about different games. So they're review bombing games from a publisher because of another game that the publisher has made. So again, they're unwilling to participate in the review of art for its own merits. And laughably, ironically, a handful of their reviews are about lack of accessibility, about the game not having good frame rates on their GPU, and about the controllers not working, about the game looks really weird, oh, it's hurting my eyes. You are a parody. You are complaining about the lack of accessibility of a game that you won't even pay for, whilst at the same time participating in review bombings, which try to make the game more accessible to audiences not yours. Do you not see the deep parody here? As far as the Gamergaters are concerned, if you asked for a setting in your game mode to stop screen shake from giving you migraines, you are DEI. That's what that means. That's what that means. You are asking for DEI in your video games. You have left negative reviews because of lack of DEI. It's a parody. It's a parody of a reviewer. I've gone on for a while here, but I want to leave you with some quotes that really just sum up the whole situation. First one's Foucault from What is an Author? Foucault postulates, what if, in Nietzsche's notebook filled with aphorisms, we find a reference, a reminder of an appointment, an address, or a laundry bill? Should this be included in his work? Why not? Now, Foucault comes to the conclusion that it's kind of unreasonable to include a laundry bill in the body of a work, within the author function. And that's what these people are doing. They're trying to say that a consultancy bill, Anita Sarkeesian reviewing if Pale was offensive for being too big, or if Nana Pipe was offensive for having bangs and a silky dress, or if Necrobinder was offensive because she's got her chest showing. This is the level of spun up and obsessed that they are. Like, if we were looking at any other person's work, they would be going on about Nietzsche's laundry bill, right? And the other quote's here from Carl Jung. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. The world will ask you who you are, and if you don't know, the world will tell you. All of these Gamergaters have the same problem, which is that they refuse to accept that their difficulties in life are because they are unactualized. They are unwilling to accept that their egos are fragile. They're unwilling to accept that they have externalized their sense of self-worth. And so they are led by the nose by anyone who is willing to validate it externally. And they are led by the nose by anyone who's willing to just give them lip service. This is why there are so many scams in the MMO space. Go look up MMO scam. You will see 24 games, all of which promise to these people you will get an open world PvP full loot game with player housing and a true community, and you'll be in there from day one with every patch. It'll be hardcore. No, they're all scams because these people don't know what they want, and they're led by the nose to buy into the next big thing that they can be a community member of. And because they refuse to accept that they've externalized their sense of self-worth, they cannot accept that a video game where they're not the big boss, where they're not the guild leader, where they're not the most important person on the map, where they're not narratively important, they will never play. They'll never be happy with. Thank you for attending my long-winded video here about reviewers and about the off-topic. I hope that this conversation was at least useful for you to learn about authorial intent and reviewership and aesthetics when reviewing other games, and how you can participate in discourse in a constructive way that's useful for everyone and useful to society. And, you know, if you've hate watched this video, I hope you at least came away with some strategies or some understandings about how you can improve yourself as a human. Appreciate this per always. These are fairly complicated ideas, and maybe you know, somebody might say, oh well, the author function and third place framework is too advanced to begin to look at these ideas. But I think it is really important that, like, the framework is there so that we can see how Slay the Spire 2 is just another one of the pack in these review bombs. And like, my case is that these things don't matter, and one of the reasons it doesn't matter is because their strategy is well known and their strategy can no longer advance. You know, Steam no longer recognizes these reviews, Metacritic no longer recognizes these reviews, marketers no longer acknowledge or publish about these kinds of quote-unquote controversies in video games. For these people to spread this like segregationist discourse, they need to get on Twitter or they need to get on Reddit, and, you know, they're in their containment zones like 4chan and Kotaku in action. And unfortunately, because they're not rational actors and most of their opinions aren't based on anything, you know, they're always accruing more members that they've been able to make angry about nonsense. You know, such is the way. But the thing is, it's getting harder and harder to convince any sensible person to ever take any of these ideas seriously. And the only tool they had in the past was the tools like Reviewership that Steam offered, and like the comment sections underneath reviews of video games on the gaming websites. And guess what? All those gaming websites are gone because they destroyed them all. And Steam no longer recognizes their reviews because they're not paying customers. Anyway, hope everyone's enjoying the game. Like and subscribe. Any comments or questions, chuck them down below. All the best. Ciao, ciao, ciao. Bye.